Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel and you're watching TechStrong TV. Today's Thursday, May 21st, and we've got some great interviews, some great news, and some great information for you. Hope you're all well. I hope you're all safe and healthy. I got some news this week. A friend of mine in the tech industry lost one of her parents and possibly a second now to COVID, and it really brought home for me that, we get these big numbers. We're coming up on 100,000 people dead. There's probably more in the U.S. But, how often does it hit home? How many people do you actually know that have had lost loved ones from COVID? It's a terrible thing, and unfortunately, for most of the ones we're seeing, it's older people, our parents, grandparents, perhaps. And read an article this week about someone, having to say goodbye to their grandparent over the phone because they couldn't get into the hospital. And it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing we're all going through. I pray and hope that we come out of this on the other side soon, that there's some treatment, there's a vaccine, there's something that allows us to get back out among the living and healthy and enjoying our world. That being said, though, we're here and we've got work to do. You've got work to do. We've got work to do. The world has work to do. And that's kind of what we do at TechStrong TV. Try to not focus on, that, or at least not right now during the show, about what's going on out there. But what about what's going on in the world of tech? What's going on in the world of DevOps, development, cloud native, cybersecurity, digital transformation? Those are the kinds of topics we cover every day. And we have plenty of great topics to cover today. I've got two things I want to mention a little out of the ordinary first. First of all, we are taking a mental health day tomorrow at Media Ops. And so for tomorrow's show, Friday, May 22nd, we're actually going to replay one of our earlier 38 or 39 episodes in its entirety for you. Of course, you can always catch all of our episodes on demand on TechStrong.tv, on Digital Anarchist. I think they might be on YouTube, on the DevOps TV channel. They're up on our mobile app at the DevOps.com mobile app, as well as the DevOps.com app on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire as well. But if you like watching this show streamed every day at 9:30 Eastern Time, we're going to stream a previous version tomorrow. Hopefully it's one you haven't seen already. And then Monday we are off for Memorial Day here in the U.S., and there will be no TechStrong TV on Monday. We'll come back Tuesday with a fresh show. Also, starting next Tuesday, you're going to see us really talking a lot about TechStrong Con, which is June 4th, 12 hours strong, starting at 10 GMT. We have 30 or 40 speakers. We're going to show video snippets of some of the speakers. We're going to get into what some of the sessions are about and really, give you a good look into why TechStrong Con is a virtual conference you don't want to miss, and that's June 4th. All right, enough about all that. Let's dive into what we got for you today. And today, I'm happy to have a couple of great interviews. First of all, I have Steve Moore from Exabeam, and Steve is VP of Security Strategy over at Exabeam. And we're going to talk about some of the contact tracing programs that are being bandied about. Some are being put in place, some are just being talked about. But what does that mean in terms of privacy concerns and potential for abuse by, corporations, governments, hackers, bad people, etc. So that's a really good conversation with Steve. I enjoyed talking with him. I think you'll enjoy it as well. After that, we have Daniel Kirk and Mark Retzman. A couple weeks ago when we first started TechStrong TV, I had Daniel on. He's the CTO for the code project, and I forgot the name as we're speaking here, that IBM is a main sponsor of, and it's a virtual event where people submit their projects, and the winners get a bunch of financial support from IBM and others to take this take this code and project open source and go from there with it. Mark is from Altran, and they're one of the 3 finalists in this year's event. So I hope you'll enjoy it. It's a good conversation. And actually, Mark and his team did a nice job with a COVID-related app or project they've developed. From there, we're going to go to our Something Old. And our Something Old today comes to us from DES London, DevOps Enterprise Summit London, which is about a year, this year's event, which is, of course, virtual, is about a month out. So this is a little less than a year old. But it features one of my favorite DevOps authors, Mark Schwartz. Mark is, of course, an executive with AWS. And this was the book he had released just last year called War, Peace, and IT. It's a good book. Mark, in this interview, Mark gives us a good rundown of what the book's about. After that, we'll take a quick commercial break. I'll come back for the news. And then we're going to hand things over to Charlene O'Hanlon. And Charlene has 2 good interviews today. One is with Jonathan Hunt, VP of Security at GitLab. And another is with Dror Davidoff and Andy Feit from Aqua Security, who just announced yet another funding round for the company, bringing their funding to $130 million. And Charlene has the scoop on that. And then, you know what? It's Thursday, and I'm really, really happy to announce that we have episode 2 of our DevOps Cafe podcast, featuring none other than John Willis and Damon Edwards. And I'm also happy to announce here on the show today that DevOps.com, us, are going to be the sponsors for the DevOps Cafe podcast. And so you might see a logo on that, the DevOps logo on that. And we're really, really proud. You know, when I first got into DevOps 8 years ago, 8 years ago, DevOps Cafe podcast was something I listened to all the time. So, and I learned a lot about DevOps from it. So we're really happy to be sponsoring that. We do have other sponsorships available for the podcast. So if you're a marketer out there looking to really get your name behind, quality content, John Willis and Damon Edwards' DevOps Cafe podcast is right at the top of that list. After that, we are going to go over to the Analyst Corner with Mitch, where Mitchell Ashley has some great interviews and sage words of advice for us. And then, speaking of sage words from advice, we got the channel guys. It's Mike Vizard and Frank Olhurst on their channel Roundup. And then that's going to close out our show. A little long today, probably about 3.5 hours worth of some great content. We hope you're going to enjoy it. I think you will. But let's take a quick commercial break right now, and we'll be right back with our first guest.
Tech is strong. We may be working from home, but tech goes on. Tech will continue to collaborate. Tech will continue to communicate. Tech is strong. Join us for TechStrong Con, June 4th, 12 hours strong, Tech Strong. Featuring John Bacha-Galupe Willis, Shannon Leitz, William Hurley, Jasmine James, Kat Swatell, Cornelia Davis, James Wickett, Courtney Kissler, Damon Edwards. Live Q&A with speakers, exhibit halls, and more. Free, but register before spots fill at techstrongcon.com.
Our first guest today is Steve Moore. Steve is the Chief Security Strategist at Exabeam. And Steve has a career lifetime's worth of experience in the cyber and security space. Steve and I have we had a great conversation. We started off with this, what's going on with contact tracing apps. We have the Google Apple partnership working on using smartphones for contact tracing. There are other apps out there that are being used as just brute force humans doing, contact tracing the old-fashioned way. But the bottom line is there's also a tremendous capacity for abuse here, right? Whether it be through corporations, governments, cyber criminals, and how do we safeguard this the best we can? And so Steve and I talk about this. I think it's a fascinating conversation. I hope you will find it so too. So let's go to Steve Moore now from Exabeam.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone. All right, for our next segment on TechStrong TV, I'm really happy to be joined by Steve Moore. Steve is the Chief Security Strategist at Exabeam. Steve, I hope I got that right. Yeah,
you got
okay.
It right. You did it, yeah.
All right, we're off to a heck of a start. Hey, Steve, I think most of our audience probably is familiar with Exabeam, or at least they think they're familiar with Exabeam. But for those who aren't, or just to lay it out there, give us a quick background. What do you guys do over at Exabeam?
Yeah, so quick look into what we do. We help organizations solve problems in their security operations center, typically around event collection, event enrichment, and then using user behavioral analytics and the building of timelines to help security operations centers respond to incidents, threats, and then working on ways to give them tools to automate the response. And so you look at that complete SIM stack, so the collection, enrichment, and response to all the bad things they have to deal with. So really selling time is the way I like to say it. Not the official pitch, but we help cut down the time it takes to identify and respond to problems.
Excellent. Excellent. Speed to resolution. And if anybody wants, let me just get this out of the way really quick. If anybody wants any information, they can go to exabeam.com, exabeam.com, right?
You got it.
Cool. All right. That's out of the way, Steve. Let's jump in. There's more and more of the states here in the U.S. and around the world, countries are opening up in phases, hopefully, and trying to follow whatever best practices we may think out there. And an important element of that is the ability to contact trace, right? And there's kind of two ways of you could look at doing contact tracing. One's the old-fashioned, let's call it a brute force for our security friends familiar with the term, right? You could brute force it by having an army of humans who will swarm every person who maybe test positive for COVID or something, and then go out and multiply, right? And figure out who they spoke to and interview them and see them and, and create this whole contact map, if you will, of the contacts that person had and watch them, quarantine them, etc. Perhaps a more technology enhanced way is to automate this using technology. We've had a couple of interviews and discussions around the Apple-Google collaboration of using smartphones, for instance, as a contact tracing methodology. And look, that's great. First of all, and you got Apple and Google working together, which is pretty unusual. And then, on top of that, our government here in the U.S. seems to be very positive on it, let's call it that way, as a means to, at least contact trace people who are sick. But there's like everything else, there's a potential dark side here, right? And that is privacy issues. And can this information be used in ways maybe that, go beyond simple contact tracing to help fight COVID-19 or something? And it's a topic, we were talking off camera, Steve. It's a topic you've had the chance to discuss in several groups that you're a member of. Jump in. What do you think?
Yeah. It's so one of the things you mentioned, the difference between contact tracing and exposure notification. Contact tracing requires the skills of very skilled individuals to sort of manually build this timeline, which, funny enough, is part of what Exabeam does. This is not an Exabeam pitch, but the example kind of carries through. you're manually building a timeline of who has been in contact with who. You've probably seen images online, or maybe even a movie that covers this. The same thing happens when you have a breach. You're basically contact tracing your environment, and it's very manual for most organizations, right? You have to bring in skilled people, and they're building timelines and things like Notepad and Excel. And interestingly enough, our healthcare people and doctors and researchers are doing something very similar. For exposure notification and utilizing the Apple-Google relationship that you mentioned, the goal is to cut out that expensive manual work. But it's important to understand that just because you're automating it doesn't mean that it's the same. Exposure notification depends still on people getting tested. It still depends on people opting in. It still depends on someone turning on their phone and enabling Bluetooth and ultimately installing an application. And so it doesn't completely replace. They complement one another, but they don't replace one another. But I do applaud the efforts by Apple and Google. I do believe that we need ingredients like this today, not just for COVID-19, but for other types of medical notification. So I think it's a good thing, but I see a lot of people sort of conflating the two, and I think that's dangerous.
That's a good point, and it's a fair point. So I'll tell you, maybe it's my age, maybe it's what's going on. I find myself spending a lot of time on my health apps these days, whether it's monitoring vitals or key metrics and exercise and stuff like that. And I hear it. But of course, Steve, the problem always becomes not for people who are going to use these apps and this information for sort of their intended use here, if you will. Excuse me. But for people who, the potential for abuse is there. And, one lesson we've learned in 25 plus years on the internet is if there's a potential for abuse, it'll probably happen if we don't do anything, right?
Negative outcomes could absolutely occur. If you look at the core, and you said you've had other guests to talk about sort of what Apple and Google are putting together, I believe in the foundations in terms of it being anonymous information. If you look at these sort of key value pairs that are generated, that are random,
yes.
They're these beacons, it's very well understood, and I think that's very safe. And I think it's largely for the best. I really do in both my technical background and also just in my heart. The question becomes, what is the application that's built on top of that? And then who builds it, and how strong is that? What could we open ourselves up to? If we think of the implication I've not heard anyone talk about yet is, how much trouble could you cause if you polluted that data, right?
Absolutely.
How much of a tar pit could you create, or hysteria in a certain environment, in a certain locality, even at an individual level? So in some of the apps, so there's 26 apps that are being tracked. The MIT Technology Reviews tracking all the apps around the world, and there's 26 that are sort of been documented so far. Hundreds of millions of people using it, using a variety of apps. But even if you were to go into a densely populated area and then walk around, and if you can self-report that you have COVID-19, think of all the people that it's going to potentially ruin their day, right? And so and then on the flip side, it's the adoption piece. Everybody has to participate in this. And so there's all these sort of, there's the platform, which is good. There's the apps, which are above that, which I think are in question. We all know that mobile apps have issues, traditional apps have issues. So who's going to vet the security? And then there's sort of the social implication sort of on top of that. And then the fourth piece, the fourth layer of sort of Steve's onion here is, what then beyond social, how does it affect business or government, right? So does this sort of alerting platform, is that your ticket? You talk about telemetry data on health and wellness that you pay attention to. What if it includes your vaccination or testing information, antibody information, or contact tracing information, and you have to show that when traveling now or when entering a building? There's discussions, private discussions going on right now about the implications of that in private groups, which I was kind of surprised at. So I don't know if I mean, if you heard anything about.
I know we've heard. I forgot what the word they're calling. They're not calling it a passport. Is it a certificate? Yeah, basically, that you've either had COVID and you have antibodies, and you're marked as if that's enough to say you won't get it again,
Right.
and you're safe to go out. Of course, who knows? But you know what, Steve? Though I hark back to before we had an internet, before we had mobile apps, right? When I was a young person, when you wanted to travel to a country, you had to have vaccines. I don't know if you remember those days, but you had to have vaccines to go to certain parts of the world, right? And you had to have your shots up to date, right? Just like your dog does or pet. And you know what? People didn't consider it an extreme, violation of privacy. I think the issue now is, A, we're a lot less trusting of government, right, is one thing. And then B, we are certainly a lot less trusting of Big Brother, whether that be government or big enterprise, multinational companies. It's funny because at some level, especially as you get to millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, whatever, the expectation of privacy is much less because we put everything on social media anyway.
Right.
But at the same time, hey, the government might be tracking your health information. Hold on here. No one's tracking my health information. Right? I don't want to have a red R or a red S or whatever I forgot the book already, the Scarlet Letter.
Scarlet Letter, yeah.
Yeah, right. I don't want that on my digital identity. And so, people get freaky about it. How do we, what do you think?
The duality of it. I mean, I don't have an answer for that. People will put their entire life on Instagram. They'll even add their phone number for security. You watch, kind of the, what is it, Citizen 8? Some of the, these ideas of how we're being tracked. You have Facebook, of course, that includes your favorite color and your dog's name, and all these personal details that are then utilized for password creation. We do all of this, but then when there's something that could maybe save a life, people would, back off very quickly. I don't have an answer for that. I think it's humorous that we would have an argument. We would give away our information on one hand and then maybe fight helping someone else with the other. That's a lesson in psychology that I don't know that I'm qualified to go into. But
it's the schizophrenia of our digital identities today, right? No expectation of privacy until I want to bitch and moan about something, basically.
Right. I mean, if you believe some of the things that we've learned that I was referencing Citizen, I think it's Citizen 8, but like this, Snowden and his discussions and the various documentaries that have been made, we're already being well tracked. And in this, I really do believe that the privacy implications are pretty small. I think the social implications are much greater. And, there's discussions I mentioned earlier, like with CISOs discussing, they're getting questions on, think of a giant call center. Think of a giant open room. It may be involving your call center or a third party that does, you offshore or you outsource. You may have rules in there that are sort of tied to say, hey, look, we don't want people coming in and servicing that area if they've had COVID or if they've been in contact with somebody who has. Well, how do you track that? Is it phone calls? Do you try to automate it? Do you try to tap into this API potentially? Do you have to show your vaccination papers, and is that made digital, right? So it's thinking of physical security and then IT security. So these CISOs are getting asked that are ultimately in charge of, third-party risk and business continuity, and then looking to stitch that into their analytic and response capabilities. Now, is that right? Should that be part of your access? Physical? Is that part of your badge when you badge in now? These are the ethical questions.
You know what? But it's real world. Look, I'll be honest. Every day at 10 o'clock, we do an all-hands meeting here at Media Ops. We're small, Steve. We're 20 people.
Right.
But we all get on every day at 10 Eastern time and do our meeting. And, the discussion today was, look, I know everything is opening up and people are going back to gyms and shopping and restaurants and all of these things. And we, though most of us are here in Florida, we're pretty dispersed, New York, Texas, Virginia, Colorado, a few others. It's all fine and dandy. I'm not telling you all to stay in your house. But as someone who's in an at-risk category, I'm not keen on having you back in my office after you've been out to restaurants, gyms, and everywhere else. Right. And so I told everyone this office is going to remain closed other than me coming in for my video with one person until we give this opening up 2, 3, 4 weeks and we see our numbers spiking, our deaths rising, and especially locally here in the area. And until I have that information, I just consider it too much of a risk. Now, multiply that by a big organization, Steve. I mean, right. No one is sitting there in their desk saying, well, I'm going to rush to open things up and have a death on my hand, right? Or have members of my team get sick, right? I don't have to tell you what it's like. And but that's the real world, and this is probably most CISOs who've had any sort of CISO training, if there was such a thing as CISO training, right? I don't know if they've dealt with this issue. This isn't your average manage the risk, right?
No, the closest thing that most of them have had, in my experience, would be some flavor of natural disaster that's located in a specific area. So Manila gets hit with a tropical storm, Virginia data center gets hit with a tornado, something like that. And so it's more of a disaster recovery business continuity exercise than it is a human life proposition. There may have been injured individuals, but it's not at the scale, and you can sort of recover in other areas.
They're not contagious. That's the problem.
Right.
They're not contagious.
Finality. Right. Yeah. The finality isn't there. And we are dealing with, and as we know, this is a very emotionally charged thing. It's become politicized. It's become, sadly, there's very sort of extreme views on all sides, and that could affect how we manage the response as a corporation. The other sort of implication beyond contact tracing is the other sort of hidden concern among CISOs and CIOs is loss of talent. So we've sort of proven that we can work remotely. And it's like, wait a minute, I don't have to live in the Bay Area anymore, or I don't have to live in New York City anymore to get a great job. So people that have great staff that are in these hot locations, they're talking about, okay, we may be forever virtual. And there's many organizations that were, hey, your butt better be in the seats, right? So it's that kind of a shift too that this is leading to.
You know what? And it actually, so we did an interview or a session on one of our virtual events back in January called Predict. It was looking ahead. And we had the CEO of GitLab on, right? I don't know how much you know about GitLab. They're about 1,000 people and they have 1,000 offices. There is no office. Everyone works from home. CEO on down. They have no office at all. And the guy's pretty smart, Sid Sibrandy. And Sid made the point that actually the converse of your point, Steve, which is in today's world, talent is dispersed throughout the world. Yes, there's a concentration of it in San Francisco or New York or Boston or Austin or London or what have you. But increasingly, unless you are some sort of worldwide Fortune 50 company, you are not going to have enough offices in the world to be able to have an office where you're going to find talent. And so you have got to you know, sometimes you got to let it go, and if it loves you, it'll come back. Jonathan Livingston Seagull, right? Sometimes you just got to let that office paradigm go and let people be where they are if you want to leverage their talent, unless you're committed to opening offices all over. And now I think we're seeing the reverse of that, Steve, right? Hey, I've got offices in San Francisco, and as a result, I got to pay people, 250, 300 grand a year because they have to live there, right, in that Bay Area. Well, damn, if those people want to move to Oregon or Idaho or Nevada or Colorado, wherever, I could probably pay them a lot less, right, and not have the overhead of my, and that, from a CISO's point of view, right, it's going to make their head explode, right? So on one hand, I got to make sure it's safe when they come in here, or as a CIO. But maybe I don't want them to come in here. Maybe I want to, this gives me the opportunity maybe to poach talent at a much cheaper level wherever. Look, this is like throwing all the cards up in the air, Steve, and let's see where they land this time. It's going to be interesting.
Agree. Man, this is a reset button on so many levels, and you hit on it. It's some short-term pain on staffing. It could be some long-term benefit. It's some real pain if you own a bunch of expensive, either expensive homes or expensive real estate potentially, right?
Yep.
Because that capital. Not to say I'm not qualified to say don't invest in real estate. It's a good investment typically.
No, speak to your real estate financial professional. We don't.
Right.
We don't disperse advice here.
No warranty. But I mean, the music has stopped in some ways, right? And so, what is it? What do we need to get better at? We spend a lot of time talking about, or I have spent a lot of time, and maybe we'll spend some time now. I think leadership is going to have to change in terms of the skill set of the personality of the leader. I think if you're a mediocre leader, it's going to be harder to manage. If you're used to being able to, leadership by walking around is what they used to say, and that doesn't fly anymore. We're virtual now, and so if you're mediocre, you're going to be a little worse, and you need to realize that.
Yeah.
If you're a hard worker, you may burn yourself out because now your workday really has no limit.
That's a huge thing. Yeah, no, that's a real problem. I'm seeing it with my staff. I mean, we're taking a 4-day weekend this weekend, and I told them take a mental holiday, right? Because we've been going hard since this COVID thing popped up. We spun up this TV thing. I felt like the team needed a shut it down for 3-4 days and recharge time. The whole separate issue, we could do another show on it, Steve, about burnout and how working remote teams and stuff and crisis, working in a crisis you can't keep a crisis on forever. Eventually,
you'll have real health implications. That was what my past is. So breach response. I was at a Fortune 30 company. They had a very expensive problem dealing with the Chinese. My group was the one that responded to that. And so that's in a prolonged crisis, high stress. So high cortisol, low sleep, poor diet. We're in that right now, except it's different. We've got people that are responsible for caring for their children.
Yeah.
Childcare is out, work days
not
are
just
long.
caring, teaching their children, right? They're being, it's a different thing.
Talking with CISOs right now. Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
No. I was going to ask you. Good, keep going.
I'm talking to CISOs and CIOs right now. Things like ticket volume is up about 4-fold. VPN activity is up about 3 to 4-fold. Zoom or equivalent meetings are up 10-fold. So the use of productivity, right? You believe it?
Yeah.
And they're saying productivity, they believe, which is kind of a scary thing to measure, is up about 30 to 40%. So they're getting that much more. But there's a law of diminishing returns. You can only push people so hard, and they're not maybe being asked to be pushed, but they're being pushed as a result of this new situation. And so that doesn't last. We've got to pump the brakes, just like the 4-day holidays.
Yeah. Just take that days, man. Steve, I'm a basketball fan. Pat Riley, right? Pat Riley was an amazing basketball player and coach. He coached the Lakers. Yeah, coached the Lakers during Hollywood time. He coached the Knicks almost to a championship, which is an amazing feat. Considering how bad the Knicks are, and I'm a Knicks fan, he coached the Heat to a couple championships. The thing about Pat Riley, he was a master motivator, where he would keep that team, he'd give that team that edge, that fine edge. He would, they were motivated and running on all cylinders. The problem is you can't balance the world on that pinhead forever. And sooner or later, you either burn out your players, you wear out your welcome, and it becomes less effective. It just becomes wah, wah, wah. And people tune you out. And I think, if you say March 13th is when, let's give that an arbitrary date of when this COVID thing really, everybody, work from home. We're past 2 months of it now. I think it's time that people need to jump out of crisis mode and say, okay, let's start normalizing here, right? If I'm going to do this long term, it's fine. I've told my people, no rush to get back to the office. And I think CISOs and CIOs have to do that. But at the same time, we also have now had 2 months to think about, well, what do we need to do? Like, stop flying, from the seat of our pants and think about, security-wise, what do we need to do here to normalize things? What do we need to do, if it's contact tracing, or forget the word contact tracing, what do we need to do to ensure the safety and health of our workforce? Right? As we talk about whether they want to come back or not, right, is up to them and management. But if and when they want to, what are we going to do?
Yeah, there's a big, there's a huge effort. Most, at least larger organizations, are even going through and figuring out what doors in the buildings open, what direction. Hallways are directional, right? So they're one-way hallways now. Every other cube or office is empty. And so there's these mechanical things that are happening that change sort of the behavior, and you have rotations now. So you're only allowed in the office every other day. It's sort of like,
I've thought about that too.
Remember when there was gas shortages, right? And you had your license plate.
Even days.
Right. So this is.
I'm not really that old, Steve. They told me about it.
Right. I'm really not either, but I'm high miles.
Right, exactly.
A lot of gray.
Prematurely gray. At least you have hair. Don't knock it. Hey, you know what, Steve? We're so past 20 minutes. My director's flashing all kinds of crap at me here. I gotta cut our conversation today. But let's have another one soon, man. Come back and let's continue it.
I'm happy to. I loved it. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Hey, Steve Moore, Chief Security Strategist for Exabeam here on TechStrong TV today. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
Oh, so our next interview features Daniel Crook, who's the CTO at IBM for Call for Code, and Mark Ritzman from Altran. When we first fired up TechStrong TV, I guess mid-March, Daniel was one of our first guests, and he spoke about the Call for Code project, how it's always been virtual. It remains virtual now, obviously, but that they were really looking at a COVID-19 sort of focus for the kind of projects that they were looking at, for the Call for Code program this year. And they've gotten it down now to 3 finalists. One of the finalists is the team from Altran, which Mark Ritzman leads. And they're going to talk about what Mark and his team came up with here to make a top 3 final project and some of the other stuff as well. It's not just the Altran stuff. But let's go to our interview now with Daniel and Mark, and we'll see what they have to say.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. We're back here on TechStrong TV. I have 2 guests for this segment I want to introduce you to. One is a repeat guest, Daniel Crook. And Daniel is the CTO for the Call for Code program at IBM. And Daniel, you were like one of our very first guests when we were first spinning up TechStrong TV. I guess it had to be 7 or 8 weeks ago, because we're in, I want to say, week 8 of TechStrong TV. So welcome back, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. And then joining Daniel and I is Mark Ritzman. And Mark, you're the new guy on the block here, so we're going to let you go first. Why don't you introduce yourself and your company to our TechStrong TV audience?
Great. Thanks, Alan. Very happy to be here. And hello, Daniel. I work for the Altran Group. We were recently made part of Capgemini. And we're a global research and engineering firm that does a ton of work in software and software development for customers around the globe.
Excellent. Daniel, go ahead. I introduced you, but why don't you reintroduce yourself?
Sure, and I'm glad to be back. My name is Daniel Crook. I'm the CTO for the Call for Code Global Initiative, as well as IBM's Code and Response program. So a dual role. One is the competition, where solutions such as the one from Mark's team came through, and one for helping deliver that solution, make sure it's deployed in the real world.
Yep. And Danielle, testing my ancient memory, when you and I spoke last, we were just announcing, the Call for Code announcement had gone out, and there were companies already submitting. And of course, Call for Code is something that IBM has done virtually now for a few years. And so this whole COVID thing wasn't an impediment to it. And basically, organizations like Mark's can submit projects to the Call for Code contest, and then you guys pick, I guess, a top 3 or a top 5, and then an eventual winner, and that winner is then receives an awful lot of support from IBM and the whole Call for Code community, and there's a bunch of other sponsors, in taking that software as an open source project and really kind of giving it the structure and resources that you need for an open source project to thrive today. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right. So Call for Code, what sets it apart from other Tech for Good competitions is that idea of there is a competition, there's a cash prize, there's support, but this actual deployment, taking these ideas, giving them mentorship, giving them connections to public and private partners, and an IBM Service Core team to help them take the idea to the next level, that's what's different. And in our 3rd year, it has again been a virtual competition over many months where we engage folks from around the world. Last couple of years, it was 156 nations, 165 last year, and even more this year. We're beyond that already. But we did launch, I think when we talked last time, was the climate change track. And what we did was we added a parallel track to that. So it's going to be similar to previous years in that the competition goes for another couple months to the end of July. So we're still accepting solutions. But what is different is we were able to identify 3 solutions early, just like the one from Mark's team, and get those deployed early. So we've been fortunate that we are in our 3rd year. We have a framework in place. We have a deployment mechanism. So we're very excited to get going already with that solution this early in the competition period.
Fantastic. And really, it's just a great project, right? For all the right reasons. So, Mark, you're one of the, well, not you personally, but the project you guys submitted to Call for Code is one of the 3 finalists, as we've said. Why don't you tell our audience about your project?
Sure. So we at Altron, have very strong relationships with IBM. We've got some ex-employees here, including myself. So we were very familiar with IBM's DNA, its corporate culture, the idea of tech for good, and IBM has just always been there when things like this happen. And when we saw the call for code opportunity and we saw that it was being reoriented towards COVID, we just jumped all over it. So we had been part of Call for Code last year for the climate change initiative. And the way we went about it is we did a overnight hackathon from a Friday night into a Saturday night. It occurred in India, where most of our engineers are located, and hundreds of people participated. So given what's going on now, and given you can't put hundreds of people in a room, and given the accelerated deadline for Call for Code, because submissions were due April 27th, and this was at the end of March, beginning of April, where we were getting going, we rapidly put together a team to ideate, to come up with ideas, to brainstorm, and that quickly coalesced into a list of 26 different things that we were looking at. And then what also happened was the support that we received from IBM was absolutely incredible. We were able to go through some training classes. We had some talks with some of their engineers. We wanted to deep dive on the chatbot and the chatbot technology to figure out how to plug that in. We were looking at infrastructure, at cloud, at database. So the idea of speed and how are we going to pull this off in 27 days became a lot less daunting because of the support and because of the resources that IBM made available to us. So what we ended up on, and as we were going through this and doing this in real time, couldn't be prouder of the tech community in general and the things that tech was coming up with. And it seemed like every day better and better ideas were coming out. So we hit on this idea to build a multi-sided platform with connection and all of those infrastructure things and scalability and extensibility things in the middle. And we decided to start with an application that relieves the stress on the healthcare system. But we designed it and worked on it in a way that it can expand to other things. And in that way, we wanted to try and encompass and try and bring in all of the great ideas and not necessarily limit ourselves as this thing went forward and this thing actually got built. So it's called the Are You Well application, and it's also a platform. Once we hit on that, we got our 5 guys engaged, and our 5-person team was off and running. And what they came up with was a design and a playbook and hills and development path for the infrastructure. And then we also worked on applications for the patient side, the human being side, and also the medical provider side, and put those mock-ups together and began working the connection there. But as I say, part of the good ideas we had, in addition to working with COVID, was all the other medical things like diabetes and things like that may be getting put off that also need to be treated, so we can expand to that. We looked at social services. We looked at essential services and supplies and things like that. So a long-winded explanation. It's a multi-sided platform. It's called Are You Well? It connects users and patients with healthcare providers. It's built on the IBM infrastructure and foundation, and it can scale up and move into production.
It's fantastic. So, Daniel, give our audience, Are You Well, one of the 3 finalists. How do we get from 3 finalists to winner and then out to the implementation and support, distribution, all of that good stuff?
Sure. So with these solutions we recognized early, a lot of what we kept in mind was a couple of things there that Mark mentioned. Number one is, how ready are they to go? Are they immediately something that can be deployed and make a difference? And are they something that has a structure or framework in place where they can be used outside of the initial use case? So it was great to see not only how the work that they had done to bring it to where it is in 1 month already, but it was obviously something that could be long-lived as a sustainable open source project, which is key to what we want out of the Call for Code program. Now, Are You Well, as well as the 2 other early selected highlighted solutions, we've got teams working with each of them right now. They've got a leader. In the case of Are You Well, there's our folks in India who've been part of the developer advocacy with Mark's team, that they're going to run with them, understand what they want to do over the next 6 weeks in 3 2-week sprints to start. So understanding what sort of hardware or software support expertise they need, what sort of cloud credits they may need to continue the solution, and any other connections with other partners. So we've also been fortunate enough that Anthem, a large healthcare insurance provider in the United States, has volunteered to help validate the solution as well. So along with them, we're going to connect with other public and private partners to help act as kind of the end user, the client, or some stakeholders around the solution, so that it's immediately something that makes a difference, can be transferred as much as possible, even beyond the context in India. But we're pulling together a team to support it, and we're very happy to see how mature the project was already, because that should hopefully make this a lot faster.
Absolutely. Daniel, can you give us, so this is, RUL is one of 3 finalists. I don't know if we want to mention the other 2 finalists. I'm sure they're all worthy of recognition if they made it this far into the competition.
Yeah, I could just give you a quick overview. So whereas RUL focused on relieving the stress on the medical system by looking at the end user patient and the medical provider, the other 2 solutions were in kind of different domains, right? So the first one is something called Smart Queue, and this is about how a retailer and a customer can use a mobile app to coordinate who enters a store at what time to avoid people standing outside in lines. So that's one application we're supporting. And the other one is called COVID Impact. And it focuses on startups and small businesses and making sure they are aware of and have access to government resources such as grants and loans, things that they may not be aware of, kind of that information come to them and they can see what to act on, and therefore can keep their business afloat during these tough times.
Excellent. Now, there could be only one, right? How do we get from 3 to 1 here?
Well, with these, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So with these, right, we're highlighting the 3. There's no real winners just yet with the 3, right? They're all very promising solutions. We're delivering them as much as we can. They remain eligible for the global competition. So they may still place as one of the top 5. One of them, such as Mark's, I hope, their application might win the overall grand prize in the Call for Code competition. So it's all about the technology, making sure it makes a difference. And for some developers, they're motivated by the money, some by the fame, some by the recognition, and others by the impact they can make on society. So lots of awards, no matter what, even if they don't win.
Absolutely. Mark, talk to us about your motivation. Well, not you personally, but you and your company's motivation for this.
I think our company, like many others, also has a COVID response plan. And we do a lot of work, particularly in Europe, with life sciences companies for acceleration of drugs and acceleration of vaccines, supply chain. There's a lot of movement now from clinical trials moving from hospital-based to home-based, and all the infrastructure and the analytics and the things that go along with that. So we had a plan, and then they said we were aware of IBM's plan and read the website and saw a couple of different ways to do that. So we really came together and kind of bounced our plans off of each other, and Call for Code was the natural place to apply our skills and to work through that. And we looked at, we're very good at building enterprise-grade systems and scalable systems, and we've got some very interesting work around design and workflow, and we're able to bring that together as well. And I think, just like I said, I think we share a lot of common culture and a lot of approach with IBM. So it just fits together very naturally to apply our skills and operate in this way to do good things. And then we're just thrilled when Bob Lord made the announcement, and he made the comment about these 3 were selected because they have the ability to change the way that we react and interact with the pandemic. And as a technologist and somebody who works in technology, I don't know that I've had higher praise or higher validation in my entire career. So it was great to hear, and we're really happy to be part of it.
Congratulations, yeah. If you don't mind, and I'll throw this out at both of you, talk to me about how obviously people and, coordination and stuff, but talk to me about the IBM technology that you've been able to leverage to build this app.
The thing that first caught our eye was the chatbot, and its linkage and its ability to answer questions and direct people to resources And I believe it's tied into the CDC database, or that's the data that it's coming from. So we sat through an interesting demonstration of that, and IBM made that available to anybody for free for 90 days as part of this. And then we did a deeper dive, and we understood what went into it, and we looked at some code snippets, and we figured out how to integrate that. So from a front-end facing perspective, that became an anchor point of what we're doing, and we're leveraging that. And then within the infrastructure piece, there's some database assets in there. It's living in the IBM cloud and going to work in the IBM cloud. And those are the major things that we were able to bring in. I think beyond the technology, Daniel mentioned working with Anthem. You know, and as a dual-sided platform, the key now is going to be to populate both sides. And I think that connection and those combinations are really going to accelerate this and make this go really, really fast and be really, really impactful. So the technology is rock solid and always rock solid. And again, if you look at the speed and the speed at which this came together, that was completely enabled by the IBM platform. And now that we have the content of the conversation with Anthem as well, it's really, really exciting. You know, and the resources and the support that we're getting from IBM are not trivial. They're in the millions of dollars of commitment, I believe. I mean, not just for us, but across the whole program. You know, and from the start, we had an idea of, you know, we wanted to make sure this could be built and this could be real. So we looked at the 27th, but then we looked obviously way beyond the 27th to bring this into production as well.
Excellent. All right, guys, we're almost out of time. First of all, Daniel, you know, it's been really cool. I got to follow this around with you a little bit over the last 7-8 weeks here on TechStrong TV from just talking about, you know, what you've done in the past with Call for Code, what you were doing this year around the whole COVID thing. And now we have Mark up here, you know, where rubber meets the road, sort of. So that's it's pretty cool, you know, and
Yeah. Would love to come back in 6 to 8 weeks and keep the story going, because it's only gonna keep getting better and better and show the actual application and the actual system in production.
Consider it done. Daniel, I'm going to give you the last word, and we'll move on.
Sure. So one of the great things that Mark did say is we've got some resources for developers who want to participate in the competition. There's those starter kits he mentioned. So a lot of what we do with Call for Code is, you know, COVID-19, climate change can be big abstract topics, but if we provide some tools, starting points, some use cases that have been validated, for example, with our friends at the United Nations, the Linux Foundation, and others, developers can really accelerate quickly, get started. And one of the great things I think in Mark's solution was not only the software itself they built was great, but they leveraged a lot of things that were out there already that IBM's provided as open source. So there's the design thinking materials. It was great to see how they conceptualize their end user first, understanding this is going to be a real solution, this is a real problem, let's document it, let's empathize with the patient and the doctor. And the other thing is they leverage the UI library we have, the design Carbon design library. And so they were able to put together an amazing dashboard with that component, with those open source components as well. So they were focusing on the core problem, and they had the supporting structure from the starter kit, the design thinking framework, and the Carbon design library. So those are also available to other participants. So we're really looking forward to seeing that innovation coming forward with all that support that we can provide.
Excellent, man. Daniel, thank you so much. Mark, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You have an invitation 6 to 8 weeks from now. Let's see where you are. Okay, guys?
All right.
Yeah, let's see if we can get Lady Gaga on the next one too, since she was involved with this stuff.
She's busy dealing with her law firm breach, but it's a whole nother story.
Different show.
Yeah, different segment. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. I hope you enjoyed this segment. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
For our something old for this episode, I went back in the archives to DevOps Enterprise Summit London 2019. And one of my favorite DevOps authors is Mark Schwartz. A Seat at the Table is actually my favorite book by Mark. But Mark is also an executive now at AWS. And last year, he released around this time a book called War, Peace, and IT. It was from IT Revolution Press, Gene Kim's company. I had a chance to catch up with Mark at Does London. We had a nice little chat. We also had done a podcast previously on the book. And if you go to the DevOps Chat archives, you could probably find it on there or on our mobile app or Digital Anarchist. I think they're all up there now. But anyway, here's my interview with Mark Schwartz, author of War, Peace, and IT from Does London 2019.
This is Digital Anarchist at DevOps Enterprise Summit, London, 2019.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com on the Digital Anarchist video platform. We're here in London at the DevOps Enterprise Summit 2019. And to my right, really he needs no introduction to my DevOps audience. Good friend Mark Schwartz, author, AWS executive now. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
Pleasure.
you. Our pleasure. And we are here talking about Mark's newest and latest book, War, Peace, and IT. And I need my glasses for the secondary title, Mark. I apologize. But Business Leadership, Technology, and Success in the Digital Age. For those of you not familiar with Mark, really, he wrote for me, which was one of the kind of my foundational DevOps books, A Seat at the Table. And then there was a second book, right?
There was a book before Seat at the Table, actually, The
right.
Art of Business Value.
Yep. And now following it up with this one. But, you know, Mark, we did a podcast a couple weeks ago where we talked a little bit about the book, some of the findings, some of the lessons you're putting in here. But
that was a fun conversation.
It was, and you can
really enjoyed that.
You can check that out. You can check that podcast out on SoundCloud or Twitcher or Stitcher, excuse me, Spotify, iTunes, as well as right on DevOps.com. We have it there with a transcript, so you can follow along. But Mark, I wanted to talk something else today about the book, and that is really who was the intended audience for the book.
Right. That's a great question. The last book, A Seat at the Table, was really written for senior IT leaders. And in it, I expressed the view that we really have to get rid of this idea that there's something called the business and something called IT, and that they're two separate things, and there's sort of this arm's length relationship. And I think my audience of readers, the CIOs and other IT executives, got the idea. But their feedback to me was, well, we can't do it alone. You know, somebody needs to tell the business leaders the same message. So that got me thinking, you know, what would that book look like if I were to address a book to CFOs, CEOs, boards of directors, CMOs, line of business leaders, you know, the people that the IT organization deals with regularly. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there's this gap in the literature right now. Who is actually talking to those people about the things that are important to them, helping them understand better, I think, how to work with the IT organization, and in doing so, transform, become digital, move to DevOps in the cloud, and these other things.
Excellent. You know, one of the things, Mark, that so I'll give you a real life story of my life. I had founded a bunch of companies, or co-founded a bunch of companies, and many of them were funded by, I have a friend, Brad Feld. And Brad, I sold my first company to Brad, and basically have worked with companies he's funded ever since. And Brad was the kind of guy, he'd always recommend books that first all of the CEOs in his portfolio company should read, and then the CEOs should recommend the books. And if it was a really great book, every executive team in the portfolio had to read. And truth be told, the true story, this is how I was introduced to the book, The Goal.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Brad said that every executive team in his portfolio should read The Goal. And not only did he say that, he sent a box of the books to every portfolio company
Yeah.
and said, read it. And when you're done reading it, pass it to someone else.
Yeah.
Because he thought it was
then
that
you have
important.
this sort of common language and common set of mental models, and
Yeah.
even if you don't just accept what's in the book necessarily, at least you can discuss it. And
It's a common
understand
reference.
each other.
Well,
Yeah.
what we did is we all read it, and then we went and did an offsite to really discuss how does it apply to our business, because this is before there was a Phoenix Project. Before,
Yeah, right.
So we were taking this book about manufacturing. It wasn't a DevOps. It's had to be 2000, 2001. There wasn't a DevOps, right? How do we take this book about manufacturing and apply it to our business, which was building security software?
Right.
Or developing security software. But reflecting back, what a great experience it was for us as a team. It was that book and the other book, The 5 Successful Habits of a, or The 5 Habits of a Successful Team.
Team Lencioni's book. Yeah.
Yes.
Lencioni.
Another one. We did an offsite on that. Reflecting back over the course of the 7 or 8 years of the company, the exec team constantly referenced those books and what we were doing. And they became really like part of they were grafted into our DNA, if you will. So I know with your book, this was, we've spoken off camera. The idea here is that a CIO who speaks the language of, he's the translator to the business executives and the IT folks. This is the kind of book a CIO takes to the executive team.
I
Right?
hope for it to be that. Yeah.
And says, read this and understand what we do at IT. How to leverage IT for good, how to hopefully decrease it for bad.
Yeah. And I don't think, a lot of people think that the challenge is technical people speaking technical talk to executives, and that doesn't work. I don't think that's really the issue, because I think everybody can understand the technology if it's explained well. That's not necessarily a barrier. The barrier is that you need to talk to each person in terms of what they care about. What are their motivations? What problems does it solve for them? And so talking to, let's say, a CFO, they might have a mandate to grow the business and find new sources of revenue. They might be worried about issues of control and risk management. And that's what the conversation should be about, right? Yesterday, I made a speech here at the conference about, or a lot of it was focused on risk. And I think it's tempting for people who are coming from an IT background to say things like the company needs to be more risk tolerant, we need to take more chances, right? We need to be willing to fail fast and things like that. And when you're talking to a CFO, as soon as you start to say that, the ears close, I think.
Well, it's more than the ears closed. They
right. It doesn't work for me.
They shun you, yeah.
And not that the message is bad. It's just that there's another way to talk about it that's more in line with the CFO's interests. So instead of saying you have to take risks, I think the truth is that DevOps and the cloud and other things we do today are actually risk reducing. And they reduce risk by letting you test out ideas before you fully commit to them, exploring a couple of possibilities before making a final decision and doubling down on it. These are actually risk-reducing things, so the company doesn't need to take more risk.
They can be risk-reducing, right?
Yeah.
Well, so to me, keep in mind, I come from a security background, right, in IT, 20 years in security. For a long time, security, and even today, security is not part of the IT team in a lot of organizations. It actually reported up, maybe through legal or to the CFO eventually. And because for a large part of my career, security, InfoSec, not CyberSec, was about risk management. And that's the language that these guys understand. It's about risk management. How do I reduce my risk while maximizing my reward? And everyone wants to do that, and it's easier said than done. But how do you in real life manage that risk to maximize or optimize your reward while minimizing the downside? And that's the nitty gritty of it to me.
I think for a CFO and for the audit committee of a board of directors, that's a direct responsibility, right? They're thinking about how to manage risk.
Risk management, sure.
I think for a CEO, perhaps a more pressing concern is how do we survive disruption? How do we grow the business? We're in a maturing market, and the capital markets are demanding a growth story. So how are we going to give them a growth? Those kinds of concerns.
And they can be punishing when you don't, though, too. Yeah. I remember once seeing a study. They went to the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, and the CTO, and said, what are the 3 to 5 things that keep you up every night? Right. And what was really interesting was what across the board, what was in common, but then also what they had were differences. So in other words, what the CEO worries about versus the CFO. The CEO worries about disruption, right? The CFO worries about the impact of disruption to the bottom line, to earnings, right? And
sure.
So in many ways, they worry about the same things. They just, their focus is maybe different.
And I would add to that, the board is also thinking about disruption. They're thinking in terms of the long-term sustainability of the company, right? They want to, how do we set up our company to be sustainable? I hope they are, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I've had the pleasure or displeasure of being involved in IPOs or companies that IPO'd and we went public and everything. And I was really upset because all of a sudden the board's focus became very quarter to quarter, right? Because the public markets demand that you miss a quarter, you may not have a long-term future, right?
Yes. And you can't afford to not think about the quarter, right? And the message it's sending essentially about your sustainability. But there is this other set of concerns, which is that companies are dropping from the S&P 500 quickly. The entire industries are changing. And so in the back of everybody's minds is, we're going to show our quarterly results, but then what's going to happen? Are we suddenly going to discover ourselves disrupted?
Yeah, and next quarter, no matter what we do.
Yeah.
So, Mark, let's return to the book. If you're a CIO out here listening, and you're thinking, is this something I should bring to my executive team? Give me 1 or 2 things that are in the nuggets from the book that is going to make a CIO out here say, I need to do this. I need to buy this for the whole team.
Well, the book, it makes the case that in a digital world where you already have digital experts in your company, like the IT organization, you have to be using them, not just telling them what to do, not just preparing a set of requirements and handing it to the technologist and saying, do this. You have to actually be involving the technologist in deciding what should be done. And aligning everybody on the business operations side, the technology side, finance and marketing and everywhere else. You got to be aligning them behind strategic objectives. And the role of IT is not just deliver what we tell you to, it's deliver a strategic result, right? This is, you're actually responsible for outcomes in the organization, and we need to empower you to do that. And I think that's the main message to leadership in a way, along with the flip side of it, which is that actually the CIO would love to sign up to be accountable for outcomes. He's been chafing at the bit, wanting to do that for a while.
Yeah.
He or she, sorry.
Well, right. A person.
Yeah.
Because we're all humans.
Yes.
Mark, we're about out of time. I'm going to have to call it a wrap. But before we do, check it out. War, Peace, IT, Mark Schwartz's 3rd book. Whether you're a CIO or not, if you're in IT, you're going to enjoy it. If you're a part of an executive team, there's something here to learn. Check out the book. Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Keep up. We're looking forward to the next one. We won't announce it here. Hey, this is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com and the Digital Anarchist. We're here in London at DevOps Enterprise Summit 2019. Thanks for watching. Alrighty, it's that time of the day now where I'm going to give you a couple of news headlines from around the media ops sites. So, as usual, right, this is Security Boulevard, Container Journal, DevOps.com. It's just a sampling of what kind of some of the new articles we have up there, but there are plenty of others, and I encourage you, go have a look at the sites to get complete coverage. But let me give you a couple highlights. On Security Boulevard, we have cyber attacks on healthcare increased during COVID-19. And frankly, this is really disheartening, right? Remember, there was a sprinkling of goodwill when this COVID-19 stuff first hit, and a lot of the hacker groups said they were going to stay away from the healthcare industry and sites because, they were being overwhelmed with COVID. Well, you know the old story of the frog and the scorpion, right? Scorpion asked the frog to give him a ride across the river, and the frog says, "Why should I give you a ride across the river? You'll sting me and I'll die." And the scorpion says, "Why would I do that? I need you to get me across the river. If I were to sting you, we'll both drown, or we'll both die." And the frog says, "Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'll give you a ride across the river." And about halfway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog. And the frog's now dying as he's paralyzed. He feels the scorpion's venom through his body. And he turns to look at the scorpion and said, "Why did you do that? Like you said, we're both going to die now because you can't get to the other side." And the scorpion says, "Because I'm a scorpion." And so when cyber attackers say they're not going to attack healthcare during COVID-19 because of what's going on, don't expect the scorpion to change their scorpions. And so we see an increase of attacks on healthcare, and it's despicable. Anyway, also on Security Boulevard, Zero Trust anywhere. Stay safe while working remotely. So, Zero Trust was all the rage at RSA conference about 2 years ago, but it's moved beyond the hype cycle into reality, and as organizations who were scrambling because they weren't really set up for remote workers are kind of normalizing, one of the strategies they're taking is a Zero Trust strategy, and it's you can't just snap your fingers and say you're going Zero Trust. Have a look at the article. I think you'll find it interesting. Let's move over now to Container Journal. Chef extends Windows Kubernetes support. Chef continues. The Chef product is widely used on the Azure platform. So you're seeing more and more Chef Windows related support for containers, Kubernetes, etc. Also, my friends at StackRox, Michelle McLean, she'll be on next week's show. Michelle is updating pod security. You should check that out. And then over on DevOps.com, we have Dell VMware extend their Google Alliance, and good to see. Trigger Mesh, we had Brian Hinkle on. Interviewed. We'll have an interview with Brian, I think, probably next Tuesday. But Trigger Mesh integrates services across clouds, and that's kind of what they're really helping people with. So check out those articles. Check out Trigger Mesh. They're doing interesting things over there. Anyway, that's the news headlines for today. Now we're going to head things over to our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon. Charlene has two good interviews, as I mentioned earlier with Jonathan Hunt, VP of Security at GitLab, and then Dror Davidoff and Andy Feit of Aqua Security, talking about their latest funding round. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and with me now is Jonathan Hunt, who is Vice President of Security at GitLab. Jonathan, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and talking with me.
Thanks for the invite, Charlene. I appreciate it. Hey, everyone.
Yeah, it's entirely my pleasure. So we are going to talk about GitLab's survey. You guys have a DevSecOps survey. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, so GitLab is the proud sponsor of a DevSecOps report that we put out annually. This is our fourth year releasing the report, and it's grown exponentially each year to what it is today, which is a survey of close to 4,000 software professionals and industry leaders in 21 countries. And we cover several topics, from security to testing to DevOps to DevSecOps, and role changes and how the CI/CD pipeline is changing over time. And it's a fascinating report. You will all want to see this.
Well, it sounds like. So let's talk about the roles that you mentioned. That I would imagine that the survey, especially having done it for 4 years or so, you guys have seen some changes in the way the roles have kind of evolved as security has become part of the DevOps tool chain, if you will.
You know, what's really fascinating, for Charlene, is that not only have we seen the roles change dramatically in the 4 years we've done this report, but the respondents have even seen their roles change significantly. So in this year's report, 80% of the respondents have indicated that their roles are changing even today, which is shocking, right? It's shocking to hear that in such a short amount of time. But as the software, as the software industry continues to evolve at the rate at it's evolving, and the introduction of what this DevOps culture is all about, what this DevOps strategy is, going to look like, and how it's going to play in the organization, is really changing things not only for the developer and the security professional and the tester, but the companies as a whole.
So I imagine that when we're talking about changing roles, obviously, DevOps to DevSecOps, yeah, there's a change there, especially as security has become more integrated into the DevOps processes, if you will. But have you seen that kind of maybe a more dramatic change in job roles and job functions as, say, over the last year or 2 years, that DevSecOps has really become a thing, if you will?
It really has been recent. Yeah. In the last year or two, I think we've seen a fairly significant change in the roles of not only the developer, but the security professional, the tester, the ops person. What we're seeing really, and what you'll see in the report, is that the new landscape around shift left is really starting to take hold. And as many of you listening in probably know, shifting left is really starting to shift responsibilities and actions further earlier into the DevOps pipeline, right? The DevOps life cycle. So when it comes to, let's say, testing or security automation or scanning, it's a matter of doing that earlier in the process and catching the vulnerability sooner and catching the bug sooner than later, which is what's typically happening, such as post-production merge, right? Where we run a vulnerability scan, we find all these vulnerabilities in the hope that we can patch them before, the bad actors get at them. And so what's happening is even in this report, as this report indicates, about 2/3 of our respondents had indicated that the shift left idea is really taking hold. We're starting to do security sooner. We're starting to do testing sooner. And the effectiveness of that, which may be a different question, but the effectiveness of that is mixed results so far. But we're still early. It's in infancy, this idea. And I think people are quickly trying to adapt to learn how to do it more effectively.
Yeah, I was actually that was actually going to be my next question. Is we've been talking about the shift left for security, and it's a great thing to hear that companies are doing it, but it seems like it would be, at least in some instances, very difficult to accomplish, especially if there's traditionally been this kind of separation between church and state, if you will, between security folk and the DevOps professionals or the developers. And I just wonder how, it almost seems like a pipe dream, if you will, to pardon the pun, but it's, is that easily accomplishable? And the organizations that seem to be doing it well, what seems to be their secret sauce?
So it is accomplishable. I don't think we're doing it well yet, and I'm even saying that as head of security at GitLab, right? Mm-hmm. I think we can all do better. And that means across the board. I think us as a security organization can do better to realize this dream. I think development teams can be doing better. I think QA and testing can be doing better. I think where we're seeing some of the problems is ultimately, I think it comes to two different things. One is really finding an effective strategy to ensure that we don't delay the release of code, right? First and foremost, the company and the development teams are there to push out releases and push out product features. And I don't want to undermine that at all. That is first and foremost what keeps a company operating and what keeps customers, attracted to that product, right? But the other thing really is communication and collaboration. I'm not so sure we've done a great job at communicating out what this strategy is. Like, what's the intended outcome of, earlier security involvement and, earlier testing into the pipeline, the DevOps lifecycle. So, for example, let's talk about security for a second, right? That's the one thing I know well, right, is security. So security wants to shift left, right? We don't want to catch all these P1s that have been pushed out to production and pay, exorbitant bug bounties and, work on 0 days that we've identified and try to get those back out the door in like 24 hours before they're exploited and we lose customer data, right? Nobody wants to do that. So as a security professional, that's the worst case scenario.
Right.
So we're going to shift left and try to catch those before they make it to production. So we're asking developers to do what? Well, right now we're asking developers to do code reviews, to do scanning, SAS and DAS scanning, to bring the security professional into that discussion early. But then what's happening, right? Developers can do code review, but are they necessarily trained in the same way the AppSec engineer is trained, right? AppSec engineers are specifically trained to look for OAuth top 10, IDORs, cross-site request forgeries, right? XSF, right? So things like that. And then we're not really giving them, and you will see this in the report too, we're not really giving them the tools to identify these vulnerabilities early. Mm-hmm. So again, it kind of goes back to the fact that we all want to see this happen. And I think it's better for the company, it's better for our customers, but I'm not sure we've gotten the strategy right.
So what then, what do you think needs to happen? I mean, because as I understand from the report, developers are actually kind of feeling some sense of responsibility to having that level of security in their application. So, what do organizations have to do to kind of make that happen?
I think there's a couple things. There's a lot to unpack there. Admittedly, there's a lot to unpack when it comes to that question.
Right.
So I think there's a couple things we can do. From the security side, the organization itself could probably do better of providing secure code training, partnering with the development orgs. asking to be brought into those conversations. What are we developing? What's the product feature? Can we run, SaaS and DaaS tools against that while you're developing the code or while it's sitting in QA or in staging? Taking some sense of ownership on the security side. Security is a shared responsibility. That's what I believe. Some people may or may not believe that. That's what I believe. I think we can all take part in ensuring the security of the company and the customers and their data. So I think we can do better helping, not only taking on some of the responsibility, but also like guiding and teaching and educating.
Okay.
And then from a developer perspective, really it is a sense of ownership, right? Taking a sense of ownership for the code that you're producing and knowing that it's not just about getting this out the door, but that ultimately we're all here to achieve success. We're all on one team. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all here on the company's team, and we want to see the company be successful and keeping our company and our customers safe.
Well, it sounds like there's a ton of useful information in this survey, and I would highly recommend folks take a look at it and see, just to get if nothing else, just to get a pulse on the market, if you will. So, if folks do want to read it, how do they get to it?
You can find the survey and the full report downloadable on GitLab.com.
Awesome. Well, Jonathan, thanks for taking a couple minutes and talking with me. I look forward to diving into the survey at length and also maybe having this conversation again next year to see what's changed.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks so much. All right, guys, stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so please stay tuned. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I have the pleasure now of speaking with Dror Davidoff, who is the CEO and co-founder of Aqua Security, as well as Andy Feit, who is the VP of Go-to-Market. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. Charlene. Thanks for having us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Hey, you guys have some big news, right? Why don't you tell us about it? I don't want to ruin it for everybody. So.
All right, yeah, happy to. So we just closed a round D of funding for the company, additional $30 million. We're going to announce it today, tomorrow, and we're very excited about it. It's another big milestone for us as a company in this amazing journey that we've been through over the last 5 years.
That's great. That's great. So what is this latest round? It's 30 million, right? Who's funding it?
This is led by Greenspring Associates. It's a growth stage VC, East Coast based, and joined by our existing investors, Insight Ventures, Lightspeed, Microsoft, and the TLB partners, which is another great vote of confidence in the company. And this is another big step forward. The company growing. We have big, very ambitious plans forward, and we needed additional funding to take the company to the next level. Obviously, under the pandemic situation, it was a very different dynamic, but we're very glad and very proud that we managed to close the round and ready to take the next step.
That's great. That's great. So what does this bring your funding total to?
Total of about 130 million today.
Not bad at all. So you guys are really focusing on cloud native. So what is it that you plan to do with the money?
So cloud native is it's a growth area. Everyone are moving to the cloud. Everyone want to be cloud native. I think even in today's economy, the need for that will just accelerate. And moving to the cloud in a secure way is still a challenge. So Aqua has a platform to help companies to do the transition into cloud native in a very secure way, understanding that traditional security that they have in place will simply not work, right? So they need a new tool, and Aqua provide an end-to-end platform to help them do that. So we already have a very long list, over 400 enterprise customers, some of the biggest names out there, some of the biggest cloud native deployments in the world, right? The biggest banks, hospitality, healthcare, manufacturing, and we are now, the transition to the cloud is still happening. In many ways, we're still in the early phases of the transition to the cloud and the transition into cloud native. And there are, two very important dimensions of growth. Number one, we feel that there is a lot more that we can do for our customers. We want to expand our platform. We want to expand our offering to our customers. In the last few years, we made huge steps in covering more and more of those needs and new needs coming up in the market as new technologies hit the market. The other dimension of growth is just the number of customers, the geographical coverage. We need to propel that, and we do that in a very, very rapid pace. So, we need to put a lot of upfront investment to do that.
Yeah, I would just add, Charlene, one of the other big areas we've made an investment in the last year is in the open source world, where many people know Liz Rice from Aqua Security. She's been very engaged in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation as part of running the KubeCon and Cloud Native Con events, and is currently on the TOC for them. But she now has a team of 7 developers doing full-time creation and contributions to open source initiatives. So, that's a big investment for the company, but we feel is partly giving back and partly showing leadership in the space.
That's really great to hear, and Dror, to your point, cloud native is that transition to the cloud is still. It seems like it's been going on for a long time, but it still is very much in its infancy for a lot of organizations. So, where do you see on that adoption curve? Where do you see, are we on kind of the left side of the bell as far as, larger enterprises or smaller enterprises, or, how do you kind of see it kind of falling out with different size companies?
Well, so we're definitely still on the left side of the curve, right? Mm-hmm. This is, still ramping up. And I think what happens today, what happened in the last 3 years is that more and more organizations took their first steps into the cloud. So, as far as the number of organizations out there adopting to the cloud is, probably high level of penetration, definitely over the 50% mark. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the level of adoption within organization, right? If you look at their entire IT infrastructure, only small percent of that have already transformed to the cloud. Only a small percent of that have gone cloud native. Okay. So there is a lot of work for organizations to do. It's a long process. It will take time, but we definitely see strong signs that this is accelerating now. And I think one of the key reasons for that is the level of confidence. For a while, companies were just experimenting with things. And the set of tools available for them was not that mature as well, right? So they were trying and testing different types on how to do things. Now they build confidence, they know what they want to do, and they start to push forward. And I think Aqua definitely feel that transition. I think one of the growth areas is what we see with existing customers coming back to us, asking for more services, asking for more licenses, asking us for more solutions, because they're just pushing more and more into the cloud. So there was a period of few years of experimenting, and now we're moving into, execution, full-on transition.
So do you think that organizations will ever become 100% cloud native, or do you think we'll kind of be in this hybrid environment for a while?
I think hybrid going to win for the long term. I think this is just the nature of the business. There are companies that have already did the full trip. They tried to go fully 100% cloud, realize it doesn't work, and now back to some kind of a hybrid. And there are those organizations that take more measured steps, but I think there are serious pros and cons to each one of them, right? So there are certain applications or certain use cases that you definitely want to be in the cloud, in the public cloud. Mm-hmm. By the way, a hybrid model is still a cloud model. It's just private versus public. Mm-hmm. But there are definitely use cases of public have a great advantage, but there are other use cases where on-prem private cloud will win for the long term. So I think what we will see in the market is a hybrid. On top of that, hybrid is getting more complex because companies will want to use multi-clouds, right? They will not want to put all their eggs in one basket. They will want to use different services from different providers. And on top of that, to make things even more complicated, there is hybrid technologies, right? People used to think about the cloud as one set of technology. Mm-hmm. This is not the case anymore. There are multiple services, only in Amazon, there are, many dozens, I think 150 different services that you can use. So there's also hybrid of different technologies that is happening. So hybrid will rule for a while.
So what about DevOps? When we're talking about DevOps, that whole DevOps space with the tools and technologies and the just the processes involved, do you think that's kind of moving more toward cloud native as well? And do you see an area of opportunity there for you?
Yeah, you want me to answer that one, Dror? We're definitely, we've been seeing that it's been part of what we've been doing now for nearly 5 years, is the idea of shifting left and bringing the development teams into the process of securing these applications. And the key driver there was always that if the applications development team would create something and hand it over for security to analyze later and find some changes they needed to make, it was a very slow process. Mm-hmm. Part of cloud native is moving faster, is reducing that friction and being able to deploy your application hourly or even more frequently than that. Updates are being rolled out continuously in the CI/CD pipeline. So there's definitely been a change, and that's all about cloud native. As Dror says, whether you're doing that in a public cloud environment as your ultimate deployment infrastructure, or you're doing it on premise with tools like Red Hat OpenShift or Pivotal, PaaS. So there these technologies. They all support that same DevOps culture and that environment of moving software very quickly into production.
Yeah, one of the big tasks that, one of the big vision for Aqua is to be the DevSecOps tools, right? We want to be the security for the DevOps. And how do we provide a platform that help them end to end? Because DevOps now is much more than a persona, it's a culture, right? It's a way of doing things. So how do you embed the security in the DevOps, make it a true DevSecOps process?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's definitely an area that we're going to keep a closer eye on for sure. But so, do you see any gaps in your current technology, and are you looking to fill those gaps with perhaps with this round of funding or maybe future rounds?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We want to keep investing. We have a very broad range of offering to our customers, but in each and every area, we feel that we can do more for our customers, and it's a learning process for both sides, right? It's like our customers, as they adopt more and more services in the cloud, more and more cloud native, they learn that they have more and more needs, and we try to, keep pace with them. On top of that, we see areas that are adjacent to where we are right now, and we feel it will make a lot of sense to put them together, to put the two together and create complementary benefit to the customers by having both of them under the same umbrella. So, we already did one acquisition last year and added the CSPM, the Cloud Security Posture Management, to our offering, and then integrated with a lot of cross controls that added value. So 1 and 1 are now more than 2. And there are definitely on our radars, we see additional areas where we can relatively easy put under the same management console and create this added value for our customers. So definitely, we will be looking for good opportunities for expansion of our technology.
Perfect. All right, great. So any specific ideas for what's next for you guys then?
I think one thing to think about, as Dror mentioned, the cloud security posture management, the acquisition last year of CloudSploit. we're also doing some organic development. And one just about a month ago, we announced something called the Dynamic Threat Analysis product, an extension yet again of the product line to build that breadth. And it's something that discovers malicious software that may be obfuscated or encrypted and you can't find in a typical scanning model. And so we run that in a sandbox. Those kinds of investments, it's an investment on our security research side, an investment in our R&D side to build those products out. So some of them will be organic, where we build products like that. And then, looking out at the marketplace, I think that this situation of the pandemic is going to put some companies who are not in as strong a position as Aqua is, where we're able to go out and raise money right now. There will be people with interesting technologies that aren't able to get funded. And if we see them fitting in our strategy, we'll be very opportunistic.
Well, that's great. That's great. Good stuff. Well, congratulations again on your funding. That's pretty amazing. And I wish you guys the best of luck. And please do keep us abreast of what's happening with your company, as you guys always do. You're really good about that. So thanks, Dror and Andy, for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlene. Great to be here.
And hopefully we'll see you and the team at an event sometime in the future, in real life.
In real life, yes. Well, we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, hopefully we'll be let out pretty soon. So.
All right. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Guys, stick around. There's plenty more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Two good interviews there. Good news. Congratulations to the AquaSec folks. Especially with everything going on, to go raise more money right now is a great thing, and they are well positioned to be a leader in their space with that kind of war chest. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, I'm really happy. Last week we debuted the very first DevOps Cafe podcast video. And this is John Willis and Damon Edwards, two of my DevOps heroes. And we now have episode 2. And I'm also really happy to announce that DevOps.com is going to be a premier sponsor of the DevOps Cafe podcast going forward. And we do have other sponsorships available. If there are any marketers out there, write to us. I mean, there will be, John and Damon will have to approve any sponsors for the Cafe podcast. But that being said, write to me and we can certainly run it up. But right now, DevOps.com is the premier sponsor, and we're really happy to bring you episode 2 of the DevOps Cafe podcast.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, we've got DevOps Cafe back again. Hey, Damon, what's going on?
Woohoo! What's happening, John?
Episode
see you, buddy.
2 in our comeback.
Yeah, maybe someday we'll pull the training wheels off and have a guest.
Yeah, that's right. And someday we'll break 100 too. So
that's true.
We're going for the Guinness World Record for the slowest to 100 podcast.
Quality over quantity, baby.
You got what's going on in your world? Any new news?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting watching the world recover. We've noticed that I think a lot of businesses are back. I think it's a weird world out there that a lot of businesses, appear to be shut down, but there's a lot of businesses I think are especially on the digital side are, I wouldn't say back to business as usual, but we see a lot of activity. There's definitely about a month worth of the interest and the people's ability to think about anything other than kind of the pandemonium around us. Saw a dip, but now I think we see a lot of people who are trying to get work done, trying to get things done, trying to pick up where they left off, trying to move the ball forward. So I think it's an interesting, split in society, right? Between the still lockdown and the more the digital line businesses that are trying to get back to normal.
Yeah. I always said that, I've been doing this 40 years now. And, we've had, economic impact times, right? Like, and there's always this, like, this one's sort of like a micro version, like it's this shortened timeline. It says it's different than anything else. But what I had found most of the time, I've been independent, and what I've always seen is you have this sort of event that happens, like there was the original Black Monday back in the 80s, and there's been a couple of these over the years I've gone through, and companies will start like hiring freezes and all this stuff, but the work keeps coming on. The work still has to work, and in general, it's when consultants tend to make pretty good money is, when there's freezes on headcounts, but the work has to get done. And then there's this, hey, why aren't you guys producing anything? Well, because we don't have any headcount. And okay, go ahead and hire some consultants. And so there's this bubble of where the consultants flourish for a while until the economy gets back. And then like, we don't want consultants anymore. We're going to hire permanent.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, remember back in the early days of kind of our DevOps journeys, we talked a lot about change windows, right? Change freezes, right? And how one of the funny things is that the change freeze is never really a change freeze. It's like, oh, no change will go out. Well, unless it's an emergency change, right? Like a patch.
Unless it really has to be changed.
Well, yeah. What if the salespeople really complain? It's like, well, we'll slam that into emergency patch as well, but it's a feature release in emergency patch, right? So it's like, there's a change. And we've kind of found this when it comes to this kind of essential business spending freezes, right? It's like, we're not going to spend money unless we have to spend money, right? And I think in some ways it's very interesting because it's forcing people in the technology world to redefine what we do, not as, oh, it's a good thing. It's what we should be doing, right? More into, hey, business, this is what this is going to get for us. And, people are learning how to frame it in terms of this is the ROI, this is what it's going to do for the business. And I see this interestingly inside enterprises, right? That it's like a lot of this infrastructure upgrades or these things that are supposed to do with automation or these DevOps practices or digital transformation practices, right? That people were just doing them because that's what the industry said we're supposed to be doing. And of course, that's where we're supposed to spend money and move things forward. A lot of times have to stop and rethink and align themselves with, well, but what does that actually mean for the business, right? So I think that's a very interesting trend. But I also see it happening out in our kind of in the outside world, in the conference world, right? That we had a lot of, developer, if you're on Twitter, right, you've probably seen a lot of these developer relations or developer advocates, these little avocado emoji sometimes for fun. And, there was 6 months ago, there was a lot of arguments about this isn't marketing, this isn't sales, right? We're just there to help people. And then now that businesses have had to reassess every dollar they spend, it's kind of coming back to bite those folks in the face because they were spending so much time saying they weren't sales and marketing. Now the business is turning around saying, well, if you aren't sales and marketing, what are you doing here? Right? What are we doing this for? So now they have to reframe themselves as, oh, no, wait a minute. We are sales and marketing. We are actually helping move the bottom line for the company and for our customers. So it's a funny reckoning, I think, happening inside and outside of company walls.
Well, I've heard everybody except the true author of this quote get as attributes to saying this, that a crisis, never let a good crisis go to waste. It's actually Winston Churchill's quote. But, I think that's the difference of what people are doing right now. And it's the contrast. Like I just saw this posting, I don't know where I saw about how Apple's just hiring like monster. They're hiring some of the top technologists in our field right now.
Yeah.
Right. And that it seems to me, if you've got money in the bank, there's incredible talent right now. And I know it's easy for me to say, but like now's the time. I had heard, on one of Gene's, you were probably on it, with one of Gene Kim was running these happy hours, these Friday night happy hours. And I think it was Snover. So he said it was sort of public. He said that Satyan had said, made this big speech to everybody at Microsoft and said, there's two things we need to focus on. I'm totally paraphrasing right now, but he said there's two things we need to do. We need to be, like excellent at what we do right now. And two, we need to do the things now that will make us great once this thing is, I guess he said over, but whatever. I think most people would say whatever the new normal is. And I thought that was interesting, right? That's the don't let a good crisis go to waste. In that, I mean, everybody said, let's be excellent now, right? Okay.
Yeah.
But right now we have this opportunity to come out of this thing like better than our competitors. Yeah. And it's interesting to see the companies that are just stuck in that, like, we can't hire, we're afraid, or the companies are like, no, we're going to be around. Like, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so let's take advantage of this opportunity that, like, there's so many hidden gem opportunities right now for people. Everybody personally. I mean, you can finish that book you've always wanted to write. This window of time is, I think there are a couple of people I've talked to about this where, like, if you view this as like you've been given sort of a gift, an opportunity. Somebody was talking about college kids, right? Like, you come out of college right now, you could have one or two attitudes. One is like, the world is screwed, I don't know what to do, or like, you can explore. Yeah. Because nobody's going to look at your resume and say, maybe it was you that was telling me this, or somebody was saying, like, nobody's going to look at your resume and say, oh, I had this gap right here. You graduated and then what did you do here? Like, oh, that was COVID. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting, I've noticed also inside companies these days. And again, it's, we get this through our collaborators in the, DevOps Enterprise Summit group gets this a lot of you in enterprises. And then I know you talk to your customers, and I talk to, my customers. And it's interesting that there's kind of this tale of two cities inside these companies where they're realizing that, let's use another quote, right? The Wayne Gretzky quote, right? Don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck's going to be. And I think they're seeing that what stopped them from skating to where the puck's going to be in the past is they had to run the current business, right? And now that the current business, the brakes get slammed on, there's this idea of, well, where do we go to, right? Where do we have to be? Because, it's just kind of been a wake up call for people to see sort of the handwriting on the wall. What do we have to do in terms of being a digital business? What do we have to do to succeed? And they're putting their bets there while they constrict everywhere else, right? So again, it's kind of like, how do you align your projects towards the future versus how do you align but not too far in the future, versus how do you align your projects to the past or to the current business, right? And I think in a lot of companies, aligning to the current business was the way to go, right? That's where the sales money was. That's where the political power was, the kind of current business engines. Versus when the brakes get slammed on there, I think, the wise CEOs say, well, we're going to squeeze cost out of that part, out of existing business, but we've got to move our bets, what little, kind of powder we have left that's dry, or, cash we have left in the bank. We got to put that on what's the world going to be after this, right? And like you said, it's a little confusing right now. We don't know what after actually is or means, but that's what everyone's thinking about is, how do we skate to where the puck's going to be? Because otherwise we're going to be tied to this boat anchor.
So I have a modified version of the Gretzky quote, right? Which is, don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck's going to be. I say it's even a little more complicated than that. Skate to where the puck will be after it bounces off the wall.
That's the real magic.
Now you're really sort of playing the odds and the probabilities. But,
that's seeing things three-dimensional.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is what's coming out of it is also this just again in terms of breaking down the existing. We started talking about this on a previous episode. The whole idea of what does business continuity mean, right? That we were all thinking for decades that business continuity means your data center blows up, or your office building burns down, or God forbid there's like an active shooter or something like that, or there's a cyber attack, or there's a northeaster that buries your your campus in, 5 feet of snow and ice, right? Those kinds of acts of God, right? We're about attacking or acts of man, right? We're attacking your facilities, your data, your applications, your infrastructure, right? But now it's like the infrastructure is perfectly fine, right? But it's the people who have been disrupted, right? And it's a very interesting thing to watch because in a lot of ways this bleeds into, I think, what we see on the system safety, resiliency, kind of that human factors crowd, right? Those looking at human performance. How do we perform better, and how humans related to complex systems? How do we get the humans to perform better? I think it's only highlighting that work. The work of the Allspas and the Paul Reeds and Nora Jones and all the other friends. I think it's actually highlighting how important that is, because it's the same thing. It's like, well, what happens if our people are disrupted? How do we teach other people what they need to carry on? How do we get those people back into the mix as quickly as possible?
Well, it's funny because one of the messages that people who are in the DevOps movement, me and you, a lot of other people that have sort of been deeply in this, is like, how do we move the ball forward? How do we has been blamelessness, embracing complexity, right?
Yeah.
Embracing failure as the norm, like learning from failure, like even extended to chaos engineering. And right now, the dividing lines are the people who basically invested in those behaviors pre-COVID are doing way better than the people who weren't, right? Because at the end of the day, like this is the universe telling you, like reminding you. There was, just to go completely off script, Into Thin Air, the John Krakauer book, right? Which is that all these guys would be climbing Mount Everest became this commodity. You literally, you'd pay $90,000, you'd get Sherpers, and you'd pick a tour group, and it just had become such a thing that people would bring tea. There was one woman who brought TVs with her and computers, and as Krakauer described, is like Mother Nature got to decide on this one trip.
Yeah.
That it wasn't. Mother Nature decided to throw 100 mile an hour hurricanes at the top of the mountain. The famous story where a whole bunch of people died. I think that's the sort of beauty of systems and complex systems, is that the universe gets to take its little lick of its finger and touch the tip of your business and say, whatever you thought, whatever deterministic thinking patterns and all the things you thought you had completely understood.
Yeah.
Sorry, today they don't work. And the only way that, that's why you talk about John Allspaw and Decker and Dr. Cook and Dr. Woods, like what they talk about. And I think the lean Mike Rother and Dr. Spears say the same thing in a different way, is the companies that realize that you really are in complex adaptive systems, that you don't have control of them, and that you have to embrace, you learn through failure and embrace failure and actually celebrate failure. Like those are the people that are actually doing well, because they're in this one of the worst complex adaptive fractures that we've ever seen.
Well, it's that idea of adaptive capacity. Right? I think it's no accident that Allspaw named his, and the company named their consulting group after that. And if you think about it, the companies that embrace that, you said that it's a complex adaptive system, and we have to empower human beings to be able to have the flexibility to decouple from the old-fashioned monolith and adapt to the work, right? To be able to have that flexibility around the work. And a lot of it, I think, is focused on the disaster, the incident side of things, right? Postmortems for incidents, and how do we learn and adapt? How do we help our human beings learn and adapt, from these, failures of these complex systems, so they can better, respond to and manage them in the future. But you're right. The companies that embrace that, it's actually a lesson for how do you manage your company overall. That's, I think, the common ground with lean, right? It's about flexibly adapting the workers to the work in order to improve flow. So if you already have that mindset, this idea of going all virtual, this idea of having a workforce that might be partially incapacitated or might be, busy with family issues and not have childcare at home, or can't get to the office when they used to get to the office, or, can't get access to the systems they used to have the access to, or the people they used to have the access to, whatever it is, the companies that have already started to think about that are the ones that are successful purely because they have that, or not purely, but largely because they have that adaptive capacity. They already have that mindset of it's a complex system. The system could break at any time. How do we, or just show a different need at any time? How are we flexible, and how do we adapt to it?
I was absolutely. I was talking to Mike Nygaard recently, right? And, I was talking about like the history of circuit breakers, like he invented that. And, I was joking with him. It's like, Damon said, you must read this book. And I'm like, why? He says, well, you look like an idiot if you haven't read the book in the DevOps community. I'm like, okay, I'll read it, right? Like way back in the beginning of the DevOps movement, but it was funny when you talk about circuit breaker patterns, you talk about like he wrote the book, and then he was telling me that he'd watched the early sales, and then at one point he saw the sales spike, and he traced it back to a Netflix person who was saying, I've given a copy to everybody in the organization, this book. And I told him the story of when we interviewed Adrian Cockcroft on DevOps Cafe, right? Remember Adrian was talking about, we were asking him about like, how did you get the Chaos Monkey and all this stuff? And he said, what we did is we didn't tell everybody they had to do things a certain way, but we gave them a style guide or, reference material. I mean, actually he joked on that podcast. He said, I think you asked him, I asked him about how did you do Chaos? And he said, oh, it's real simple. I gave one book to the operators. It was Drift to Failure by Sidney Decker. And I gave another book to the developers called Release It. And Mike says, that's true because I saw that. But the thing that Adrian said, which was, we gave everybody, we said, here's how we prefer you to write your applications. Mm-hmm. And now, by the way, we're going to run this thing that's going to cause these like chaotic motions periodically, like breaking things, chaos. Yeah. And they were, yeah. And some people are like, okay, thanks, got it. We'll put it in. Other people are like, yeah, those guys. And he said, the ones that didn't put the circuit breaker patterns or didn't follow the guidelines would get woken up in 3 a.m. and they'd have these cascading failures. Right. And the ones that actually followed the guidelines most likely didn't get woken up or just got an email and said, hey, check it out in the morning. You had a little bug, but it didn't cause any problems. And that's, again, another, like there are companies now that I've interviewed and talked to that have been running chaos engineering in banks. Yeah. And it's paying off, in multiples right now.
What's very interesting is I feel like we're entering sort of the second phase of this. I think the first phase of this, a lot of it was done on the engineering side, right? Like a lot of the Release It book, it's these architectural design patterns for how to deal with failure gracefully inside your applications, right? The circuit breaker pattern, right? Or, is a classic example of that. So I think the resilience engineering message, I think, really has resonated with the software architecture side of things. And I think what's had probably less uptake is, Sidney Decker's, we'll use him as the representative. If we use Nygaard's book as a representative for the dev side, let's use
architecture. Yeah. Technology architecture. Yeah.
Right. Architecture.
But it's definitely social technical though, right? It is.
That's my point. The social side on the ops side, I don't think has had, what do you do about the people, the human operators, right? I think we've done a lot to elevate the systems, to make the systems more resilient. But I think now we're hitting a second wave where people are looking at the operators, right? And how do we make the operators better? How do we manage the knowledge that it takes to operate these systems? And how do we capture the new knowledge, right? Because it's new knowledge, there's new learning all the time. How do we capture that learning and then turn it into systems, that social technical systems that the operators can use to better respond to failure?
But I think that's your answer, right? Is what Netflix did, what sort of Adrian was not even more than half joking, right? Like, or less than half joking. He was saying, I gave, like, that's the key, right? You were just saying, like, architecturally for developers, you needed these patterns that embraced failure. You don't do Chaos Monkey without circuit breakers. I wouldn't think you would want to. And then on the ops side, you give them, just culture. Or I know a friend of ours runs a bank, 700 people in his, services delivery organization. He bought everyone in that division Just Culture by Sidney Decker. And now they're in the COVID-19 and people have embraced this idea of blamelessness. You're not going to get fired if you make an attempt to do things. So imagine the company that's still everybody's afraid to do anything because they don't, and you're remote, you can't find anybody, and you have to make a critical decision without sort of backtracing to find out who's going to approve it. How would I get in trouble if I make the wrong decision? And this friend of ours has said to me that not only they run circuit breaker and chaos engineering, that has helped on the technology and architecture side, but also saying just the fact that everybody read that book and understood what Deco was describing as quote unquote just culture. They're seeing those, the manifest of that behavior in the COVID is people are making decisions. They're not afraid to make decisions when they're in their house and they can't really get in touch with everybody else.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I think the companies that we've also seen that are able to adapt to this or have this adaptive capacity. I think the just culture one is part of it. Being able to decentralize the ability to take action and not try to hide in the CYA former way of working, right? That if I escalate this to, get approvals from, 9 different directors and vice presidents, I've got a paper trail and I can point the finger at them if something goes wrong, right? So my first job is going to be to create a paper trail that absolves me. Not my first job is going to be what I have to do now.
Right, to fix, so put 100% of your thought into, the other thing this friend of ours said is we don't want an outage right now. Everything else we got going on and all the complexity with all the sort of, the CARE Act and all the stuff that's the constraints on the financials right now are insane. Everybody's moved completely to, digital and all these sort of constraints. Everybody's remote. We don't want an outage, right? So to your point, you don't want somebody sort of checklisting their CYA checklist when they see something that might be bringing the system down. You want to put 100% of your effort into, let me fix that and stop the system from coming down.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so I think there's the blamelessness part, which stops the needless. The first response is to paper for the paper trail. And I think, the other interesting side is how do we share knowledge, right? So, that when you have this kind of a brittle infrastructure where you only have a few experts that know how to do things, a brittle system, I should say, a brittle human system, right? That a big part of those escalations were because of, or the ticket routing was because we need to have the paper trail. Another big part of it was because we've centralized knowledge. Now, whether that's for management reasons, I just don't want anybody else messing with this, so we'll just have a few people do this, or it's just reality. Things are moving too quickly, and it would it's too difficult to share that knowledge. Or for security or compliance reasons, we only can centralize things in certain groups. But the inability to share that knowledge is also making these organizations very brittle, right? So the CYA is making them very, very brittle. Nobody wants to take a chance. Right. And also the way that knowledge lives in, it's this kind of tribal knowledge that lives in people's heads.
It's not scalable.
Instead of formalized actionable knowledge.
No, when I was, before I came to Red Hat, I was doing, I'm going to call it the 7 deadly sins now, not the 7 deadly diseases, but I was doing that work where I interview hundreds of people in a large organization, and I, a lot of what I would produce as the output would be reasonably prescriptive. I mean, the things almost everybody, you can walk in the door and say, all right, if you want to save all this money, you want your 5-minute answer, I'm pretty sure if you did these couple of things, you'd probably okay. And one of them is these large institutions that say, oh, we could never go to Slack. There's so many this and that. And then one of my recommendations is and actually a lot of it is I fuse some of the really good, I don't know if you read Team Topologies yet. It's one of my favorite IT Revolution books. And especially when they talk about team APIs and how you sort of.
But by the way, I actually wrote a blurb for that book, and I basically said, it doesn't really matter if this book's any good or not. It's an important topic that no one's talked about yet.
Yeah,
that was my just review. I was It's a great book, but put
No,
aside
for me,
this could even be this could even be not that good of a book, and it's still important because as much as we talk about organizational dynamics and structure and whatever, no one's actually sat down and tried to catalog.
I mean,
all these different patterns. So
no,
it's important no matter what.
It's an incredible book, I think, because I mean, I'm gonna like sort of make up, take a pot shot. Maybe there's these books that talk about the Prussian War and try to do all these analogous stuff, and then the DevOps Handbook is very sort of rote. But they're right in the middle. They give you, like you said, the patterns. The patterns on, what is the cognitive load of build run teams, or what an API. Anyway, get it back to the point is, I've always, obviously, like you should have Slack or something like Slack, right? But in every organization. But what's more interesting is, one of my recommendations out of this is every team should actually codify their team API on Slack. Like, have your channels. You have here's our team channel for architectural discussion. Here's our office hours. Here's our generally ask us anything, but we have, and then you said SLAs. So you say, because one of the big problems with Slack is people say, well, I ask a question, nobody answers. So each team codify, like we have office hours, the SLA on a response is 10 minutes. We have the ask me anything, that's a 24-hour SLA. And so I've been recommending that to companies over the last couple of years that I was doing my consultant. And one of the large banks, another friend of ours that I interviewed, they had done, not because of my recommendations, but they had actually codified the whole organization on Slack. And so every team had, really good documentation. They had channels. And so one of the problems you get remote, to your point about tribal, or what I would call horizontal scaled knowledge, is when they went remote, they did two things. They invested heavily in Zoom for whatever reason a while back. They not only invested in universal access to Slack, but they actually codified the team dynamics and team, using team topology book terminology, team APIs. Yeah. And so now when I was asking the question that, like most companies now, one of their struggling points is one team knows that there's a team on the 8th floor, but they don't really know who they are, but they can walk up there to the cube and say, hey, I know you guys, you have this code. It doesn't work this way. When you get remote, you can't do that. Yep. And they're like, yeah, no, the way we've solved that is we invested heavily in creating constructs on Slack so that we, like our communication has actually been awesome.
Try this on.
Everything.
Try this on. Slack is the Bash of corporate communication.
There you go. Yeah,
it's unbelievably powerful, but what most people complain about is their own fault, right? Like, because you don't have structure and discipline and, maybe build your own frameworks or modularity, you say Bash sucks, right? No, it doesn't. Bash is awesome, right? And Bash is incredibly powerful, and a large majority of commerce in the world runs, as Bash somewhere in it. But people complain about it. It's like, if you just wing it and you have bad styles and you don't have, agreed upon conventions, and you don't kind of think about some framework perspective, you're gonna turn into a mess. Just like Slack, if you just turn it on as a free for all, you're going to have this mess unless you build those conventions and that understanding in. And I think why that team topologies book is interesting, it's introspection, right? It's like, who are we, right? None of those things are really bad. I mean, some might be, you could say bad, but there's nothing really bad about any of those topologies. It's just trade-offs. It's just understanding, based on how you put your organization together, these are the dynamics and the communication patterns that you're going to be encouraging. And like I told, Skelton and Pius, I told them that, I said, you guys, this is an awesome book. I said, but don't focus on the technology leaders. HR needs this book, right? Like every HR organization out there needs to read this book and understand that based on the organizations that are created largely in effect by, kind of feedback and direction from HR, they should understand what that does to the work and what that does to the organization. Because a lot of times there's no thought to that, right? And it's really like an HR book. It's not an HR book.
I would say, maybe an HR, but like certainly it should be, instrumental as part of if you have a dojo or if you have some notion of agile coaching or something like that. Because at the end, it is you have to, like that whole team API thing, right? Like that, to me, that was, I think it was brilliant, because what they said is each team should actually expose its social API.
Yeah.
But you should basically say, because, like you go in these large companies, one of the things I find often is, even when one team says, I think another team has got a service very similar, and then they go splunking or sort of anthropology forensics to find the original MRD in some email, and it's like nothing like the application. So even just a team making a promise to keep their architecture design up to date, a team saying, here's our exposed Canva edit every time. Oh, and by the way, we promise to have 2 releases of our API code and the documentation. And oh, by the way, here's our sort of office hours and how you communicate with us.
Yeah.
And nobody, I don't like to say nobody, but very few companies are that sophisticated. And if there's somebody in an organization say, why aren't we doing this? Even this bank that I talked about, they weren't completely into that whole model, but at least they had built a structure around Slack that made.
I think it's because it's new for people. I mean, I think if you think about it, organizations didn't change that fast, right? If you think back in the days, early in my career, and early in your career, definitely early in your career, like the structure didn't change. You had a very consistent structure from company to company, or sort of kind of general outward patterns. And the internal communication flows and what happened, people just knew it. They were at the job for 10 to 20 years. You knew who did what. You had very formal kind of processes for, memos, interoffice memos, and kind of hierarchical command chains for things. So you kind of had these monoliths that where everyone was bespoke. You could, but once you were there for a while, you could sort of figure out all the different routes to get things done. And they didn't change that often, right? And now, even in the last 10 years, the pace of change in organizations and what they do and how they have to work and how they align themselves, it's just accelerated, making a number up here 100-fold. So therefore, you can't do that. You can't marinate for a couple of years and sort of get your ground. You can't spend your first year working, getting your bearings, right? And then you can't wait 5 years to become an expert in the organization. Like, you got to figure out this stuff.
And by the way, you never will, right? And I think you're right. And then the problem is a lot of the leadership in large organizations came from that era, right? So I remember like 20 years ago, I did consulting at, I'll say it now, I don't care, New York Life, right? And they had one person who was she was the fear of God Oracle DBA. And like you did not, and the whole bank was, or insurance company was based on, everything was Oracle, right? Everything was based on Oracle. Yeah. And you literally had to go to this woman, like Oliver, asking for more porridge, anything you wanted to do. And there was and I actually sat in a set of cubes with a bunch of people who were the cab, right? And these people, I would listen to them. They knew everything, but this is basically almost all mainframe at the time, right? Or like mainframe-ish, like large Sunny 10s and with Oracle racks or whatever. Like so, like in that world, I'd listen to these 3 or 4 women that were on the cab board. They knew they could, like, you could hear them like, okay, are you going to do this? When do you do that? I don't see this. And in that world, you actually that could work. But you fast forward 10 years, 20 years, there's no one human. And so this idea that we have, and this flows into like lots of conversations, but the idea that there is one person or there are 3 people or 5 people that can understand the complexity of a modern bank is just,
this folly. It's back to what we said about that it's a complex system. Yeah, it became a complex system. It went from being complicated. You could argue it was probably complex back then too, right? But you could argue it's gone from being complicated, right? Where and not really changing that quickly. So just somebody could kind of, you could put these gatekeepers who could just do it over and over and over again until the patterns kind of get burned in, to a world where it's complex, adaptive, fast moving, and there's no human being that could even just if they had unlimited time, could probably figure out what's
I don't think they
what's
could.
going on, let alone the fact it's changing every.
Yeah, I mean, you listen to John Osbar's stuff, right, below the line, and I think for those, sorry, I'll apologize if people have never heard of Kinevin, but if you think about like 20 years ago, if you tried to say there was this little cloud, and if Kinevin's got the 4 quadrants from the lower right going all the way, counterclockwise to the lower left, you would say most of that sort of cloud of stuff was halfway between what they call the simple domain, lower right, and the upper right, which would be complicated. Maybe just a touch of things in complex, but not a whole lot. Like a lot of things were runbook. A lot of things were complicated. Like it wasn't as simple as a human saying, "Oh yeah, just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5." You had this sort of, there were unknown knowns, if you will. But today, if you sort of move that cloud around and you had a cloud of like all the things in IT, it would in most large banks, it would be probably in thirds. A third of the cloud would be in the upper left, which is the complex domain. And I'd say the organizations that are like more into DevOps and moving faster, more of that would be in the complex domain. And then you'd find sort of less and less in both the complicated and in the simple domain. Anyway, I don't know if that all makes sense, but I think that if you were able, for people that do know Kev and if you don't know, look it up. It's got a weird Welsh spelling, Cynfin. But get a sense of what I'm talking about. But I think I think you're right. I mean, I think the world 20 years ago mostly was very sort of prescriptive run book, and then the other half were complicated things like I'm going to make a change to a table in a very complex insurance company where this thing's going to go in, and if it doesn't go in right, and it needs a backup plan, and because a lot of tables will break and the database will break, but in today's world, it's just far. I mean, you got thousands and tens of thousands, 20,000s of VMs. You might now have hundreds of thousands of containers running in clusters with complex network routing and and then if you add things like service mesh, and you've got routing and traffic routing and circuit breakers. Anyway, the point is, I think a lot of leaders in large companies are still in that world where most things were complicated. Like I can take a car apart and I might be able to put it back together, or runbook, which would be simple, where these people have not embraced. And the ones who have, right, are the success stories, but the ones who haven't have not embraced that a lot of what they do and what they own and what they try to manage is now in this complex domain.
So it's interesting you brought up runbooks, right? Because I think we've been kind of at the forefront of this on the Rundeck side, seeing sort of the usage of runbooks, how they change. And I think it follows this. If you look at it in 3 pieces, number one is the architectural patterns that encourage resiliency, right, that we talked about. The second is the communication patterns, right? This idea of, have you codified the APIs, the communication APIs of your team, and how do you interact with these teams and across boundaries? The third is, how do you externalize the knowledge that you have to go to, because they have to go to those teams for, right? So it's like, well, if I'm a developer, why can't I do a restart in production? Why can't I run these diagnostics or these exploratory commands in these production environments, right? Well, part of it is because, you're a cowboy developer. We don't want to give you access. That's a problem you can overcome, right, with the right guardrails. But the bigger problem is because that knowledge of how do you do those things? What commands do you use? What options do you use? How do you really check to see if it's a network performance issue or not, or try to isolate these things? How do you understand, the whole observability? How do you inspect and understand what's going on inside the application? In the past, that knowledge was encapsulated in that silo, so therefore you had to use that communication path to request for them to do your work for you. And in the past, that the runbook, right, became sort of like a training manual. It was more like a man page. It just sort of had this conditions and all the options of things you could do, and you can never really write. You can never do enough pathways through that to map everything out. Versus, I think the modern use of runbooks is, how do you take that knowledge and bring it down to sort of more of a micro task level, and say, how do you do a rolling restart? How do you check to see if there's a network issue? How do you open up or inspect paths, for internal firewalls? Or how do you update the database schema in the same way we do all the time every time we have to do something new? Whatever it might be, how do you encapsulate those, the things that people have to go to the organization for, and turn them into essentially APIs, right? Turn them into an automated procedure that somebody can go and use themselves, and they can operate. They'll be operating the system, and then they use the communication patterns or the communication APIs to talk amongst each other. And that's how you build this kind of adaptive, flexible, capacity in an organization, is when you have all three of those things. When you have the resilient architectures, when you have the well-defined communication, APIs, human communication APIs, and you have the knowledge, the task-oriented knowledge APIs, to where I don't have to go and bug you to do something, for me. You're giving me your expert knowledge encapsulated in an API or a button that I could hit, that I can go and do that, and learn from it and move on.
We've got to sort of wrap up now, so I'll leave this maybe as a cliffhanger for our next one or the one after. But Jay Bloom, who I work with, has been describing this thing called the three economies, and I'd love to talk about that. But one of the things I just had this light bulb go off is basically what you have is the world has been, our world in IT has really been a bimodal economy set. What he calls, prior to three economies, you have differentiation and you have scale. And differentiation is basically dev. It's novel. It's creating new things. And scale is basically your ops, which is, and there's been a missing piece in the discussion. And again, people Google it, and then maybe next time we get in deeper, is he calls a scope economy. And a scope economy is about the elasticity or the carburetor between those two economies. And in short, we've been describing that. To me, I think that's the natural of what a platform provides, right? That you create a platform. And one of the things, and so I've always thought, and I think, again, this myopic DevOps conversation is everything's about dev, and we got to shake our sort of brain for a minute, is even in that conversation, we've been talking about the platform being how you move things from developers that are common or commoning to the platform. And then operations is sort of we hold the infrastructure. Anyway, long story short, and hate to do this with probably wrapping up, is what you were just describing, I just realized is it's actually in operations is the same thing. Like the sort of that runbook capability and all that should actually be part of that third economy discussion as well, because like developers want to sort of get rid of all the other things I have to worry about, let the platform handle it. I just want to code and create artifacts and let them happen. And infrastructure is about scale, but there's really another thing, which is operators have to do things, and they need the same abstractions, and don't make me have to do all this hard stuff. Let me just operate. So I anyway, hate to do this where we're wrapping up, but I do think I'd like to talk about how that side of how this three economy and how operators like developers need those same type of abstractions.
Yeah, and I think what I would add to that is that the reason why the communication APIs and the new form of kind of runbook automation, externalizing, the knowledge, the expert knowledge of how to do things is so important, is because, like that old expression, all abstractions are leaky, right? That the idea of a perfect abstraction that hides all the complexity, the idea of a perfect abstraction that hides, the complexity of the system behind it, just never comes to fruition, right? They're always leaky. There's always something you have to know about it. So the need to communicate and the need to operate across organizational boundaries is always going to be there. So, you have to keep those things in mind, because it's a balance. Right?
And then we want to see if we can get Jabe on too to do. Jabe is one of the premier Wardley mapping guys, and so maybe we'll figure out.
That's what I want to do. Let's put our executive producer hats on. I want to get Jabe to come on and explain to us some Wardley maps. Walk us through some ones he's already done. Just walk us, maybe just build them live, and or kind of walk us through it. Because I think I think that would really help a lot of people out there, because it's Wardley maps are one of those things that a lot of people talk about, but I think very few people can.
I get it, but I can't sell it. It's funny. You would ask me. I understand in sort of there's always these how you learn things. You sort of learn something, and then you learn how to use it for yourself, and then the next stage is to be able to teach somebody else it, right? And that's where you get to the highest order of learning, in my opinion. Is not only do you know how to use it, you understand it fundamentally. You can actually implement it in something that you do. And then that third level is you can actually teach somebody else how to do it. For Wordly Maps, I'm at that second stage. I've actually done Wordly Maps. I understand it, but I can't, for people like, when I try to explain it to them, I've not had the luck of like, oh, I get it, John. So yeah, we'll get Jabe in here. He's pretty good, and we probably should shut this down. We're getting close to an hour.
We're running out of tape, John.
Yeah, we're running out of tape. All right, man.
Alert the control booth. All right. Thanks, buddy.
Next time.
We'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, same here. All right.
Elsa, you're all over the place.
How am I supposed to do anything when she's over here just doing her own thing?
Okay, well, maybe if Dan played more than just one string, we'd all be more on the same page.
Are you out of your mind? Okay, I do the E string. That's my job.
Isn't there an easier way to do this?
I
there
wish.
has to be.
I literally just suggested
know.
something.
Right?
Nobody ever listens to me, though,
It's
so...
ridiculous every time.
When your team's not on the same page, things can get weird, fast. Don't make your DevOps team live like this.
El tutto tu tempo es finito, Dan!
See? It's like we're not speaking the same language. I'm out.
GitLab is the only single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle, making sure your teams are all on the same page.
Do you know how to play the E string?
I can learn.
All right. Many thanks to John and Damon for for the DevOps Cafe podcast video edition. Now we're going to turn things over to Mitchell Ashley at the Analyst Corner with Mitch. Mitchell is the CEO, founder, Accelerated Strategies Group. Hey, Mitchell, take it away.
On this segment at Analyst Corner, we're going to look at some of the privacy issues that are popping up because of COVID. Now, we have an interview coming up with Chris Howell, who is CTO with a company called Wicker, that's a collaboration communications platform, talking about some of the security encryption kinds of issues. But they have an interesting report. We'll talk about more in that segment, that part of Analyst Corner, going into some of the detailed issues of what they were seeing as COVID started to impact our work at home strategies in different nation states and what their responses to that were. Having that conversation with Chris harkened back for me of what happened with 9/11 and the Patriot Act, and the fact that we gave up a lot of rights, a lot of privacy rights for our government's ability to kind of hunt down the bad guy, right, the terrorists. And I'm sure while that helped, it also helped coordination amongst government agencies. There's always the concern for what are inappropriate uses for our information. And frankly, I think that's why companies like Google and Apple jumped ahead and put out what their policies were, what they wanted to do for COVID-19, and doing contact tracing, pushing it out to the edge, giving the customer the control over that. And frankly, it goes a lot to company philosophy, even to the point where some nation states may push companies to a point where they may elect not to do business in that country. Now, that said, the financial motive is strong. It's very easy to compromise those values, believing that you're doing the greater good still for customers and all things balanced, when in fact, you may or may not be doing that, may not even be asking your customers. It's a dilemma. There is no one answer, and it's a balance. And I think just to add to this, going into this interview with Chris, the message I would have is the only way we come to the balance, a true balance, is by having the conversation around security and privacy, especially when it comes to government laws. We just had the Senate pass a bill to allow the FBI to monitor without any court order, to monitor our web browsing history, get that from the ISPs. I don't know about you. I don't care what I'm looking at, innocent or not. I don't want the government to be looking at that. I don't think that's appropriate. They need to have a reason, and they need an independent third party, or you risk way too much government overreach. And there's a point in this interview where Chris, speaking in his history, so an investigator in a government job that he had, he even speaks to that. Like it's looked as an obstacle when they have to go to a third party, to a court, to get permission. But that's part of our checks and balances. And while you may fall wherever on the political spectrum, I think many Americans feel like a lot of the norms as well as checks and balances are being put to the wayside. Matter of fact, they're being threatened or eliminated altogether. And I'm sure there are times that the other side of the political spectrum has felt that too. It's never good when that's happening for anyone. So I hope you enjoyed this interview with Chris. We'll be talking more about some of the privacy issues, some of it driven by COVID-19 and the response to that, and also what consumer behavior, business behaviors are changing around security and privacy. Enjoy the interview.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, great to be joined today by Chris Howell, who's CTO and co-founder of Wickr. We're talking security, we're talking encryption. Now, of course, we all hope that our communications is encrypted, but it's a very, very important topic, especially in the COVID environment and some of the things that are happening global. We're going to get into that. But first, Chris, welcome. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Wickr too.
Thanks, Mitch. Chris Howell, I'm CTO and co-founder of Wickr. Wickr is a secure communications and collaborations company. So we focus and I guess cater to security-focused companies, Fortune 500, government, military customers worldwide.
Excellent, excellent. How long has Wickr been around?
We were founded in around 2012.
2012. Okay.
Right, so we have a few different types of products. Started out more in a consumer space. I'd say probably the last 2 or 3 years we've been focused primarily in the business space, right? Mm-hmm. So we cater to organizations with strict security requirements, regulations around security and privacy. So that's what we focus on. We provide messaging, file sharing, teleconference, those types of solutions to them.
Every day it seems to become a more important topic, privacy as well as confidentiality of information. Now you just came out with a report. I think you posted as a blog post or as a report talking about, because of COVID-19 and some of the things that are happening around the world in terms of countries, nation states changing their policies, usually in favor of nation state, not the citizens, right? About encryption and, of course, their access to it. Tell us a little bit about why did you pick on to that as a topic to go write a report on? Is it something you're dealing with directly because of these changes?
Yeah, so I think as we've all experienced with this massive shift to remote telework, right? I mean, we expected a pretty big surge in usership in our pro and business, collaboration platform. So that didn't surprise us as much, and of course we saw that. But what we also saw were significant spikes in certain areas of the world, certain countries, much more so than our average increase across the past 2 months. If you just look at our numbers straight. So when we looked at those countries, we started to wonder, like, well, why those countries? Well, how come we saw 100-200% increases in the course of a month or two out of certain areas, versus kind of the rising tide theory of more people going to telework. And as I mentioned, because we're security focused, we thought there might be something to that, right? Why are they reaching for us as opposed to kind of other types of generic, traditional teleconferencing solutions? Mm-hmm. So when we looked into the numbers, we looked specifically at kind of what was going on in the environments in these various countries where we saw these spikes. And across the board, we really saw increases in kind of government overreach, government control, looking at that are really seen as threats to privacy. And I think the first thing that jumped to mind were the COVID tracing apps. A lot of privacy focus has been put on these COVID tracing apps, and there have been various approaches to doing it, some of which are very centralized, pulling in, forcing data collection from like mobile providers and things like that, very government-centric solutions. Other approaches have been looking at more of like a decentralized approach, right, where not a lot of private information goes to a central authority. It's more about kind of what's happening out in the field, like where I am, my proximity to me, maybe through Bluetooth technology, but it's not necessarily going to my government, right? So
more of an opt-in approach as opposed to we have opted in.
That too, yeah, yeah, opt-in versus demand, and go to the providers where the individuals don't even have control. And some of the countries we looked at with significant spikes were actually mandating that people download an app and use it. Various forms of centralization there, whether it's demanding that people download an app or go right to the mobile providers and pull location information from the mobile providers themselves. So that's kind of what we saw in the areas where we had the most significant spikes. We saw the governments in those areas reaching for kind of the more centralized approach. Right. So that we found very interesting. Right. So you look at people going to a government, a secure business solution, you can kind of see as a reaction to that. Well, here, what's the overall climate that I'm operating in?
Take control of our own destiny here.
Yeah. So I'm going to do something about it. Right. So we saw that was very interesting. And we actually looked further back in our data too, that we put in our report that I think, really puts a nice underline to that theory as well. Because when we look back, let's say at the past year of our activity on the same platform, we noticed that where we saw significant spikes in usership out of a specific country, let's say, March of 2019, we saw 100, 200% increase out of a certain area, right? And that jumped for a month or two. We looked back kind of at the events in that country, in that area, and we saw similar things. Of course, it wasn't COVID tracing at that time, but it was other things like, forced encryption backdoors, forcing service providers to cooperate and give more information, about the telecommunications, infrastructure. And, even to other types of unrest, like in Hong Kong, we see there was a law that was passed about extradition. Right, where people were, for the first time, they were allowing extraditions from Hong Kong to mainland China at a certain point, and we saw at that time a big spike of usership in our business product. So that kind of led us to believe that there's something here, right? There's something with kind of the atmosphere of privacy within a country, and kind of the centralization ratcheting down by government influences. And companies taking their destiny into their own hands and reaching for secure solutions.
Now, I know you saw in your report, you were talking about spikes that you saw in Hungary, Israel, Italy, South Korea. Turkey was a huge jump. I think that was the largest spike jump that you saw in usage.
Yeah, some of the spikes that we saw that were probably our top three. It was a huge spike. I think we. Some of the really large spikes we looked at and said, some of that could be biased a little bit by there weren't necessarily a large number of users prior to.
I was just going to ask that.
This spike,
had a small presence.
So we looked at that, right? I understand that could be an influencing, but even after kind of adjusting for that, we said, okay, it's still a significant thing for us to look into. It's still among our top. Maybe doesn't matter that they're our top one or two, but they're among our top 10. Like just period. And let's look at the stats.
They're not outliers, yeah.
Yeah, they're not outliers in that respect. And there were significant things. I mean, if not COVID tracing, you mentioned South Korea. South Korea has pretty restrictive laws around COVID tracing. They've been, on one hand, lauded because it's pulled the numbers down. But on the other hand, privacy advocates are saying, but it's the worst approach to privacy. That's the price we're paying for it.
Well, that certainly hits the debate in the U.S., right? I mean, you saw with Google and Apple sort of take their destiny, if they will, into their own hands and try to use the approach or propose the approach you were talking about of an opt-in, decentralized, out to the edge, keep the privacy with their customers before the government steps in and mandates something else.
Yeah, and that's a really positive sign, right? Like I'd say 5-10 years ago, you may not have seen that as much. Right now, there's a lot more of a consciousness of I guess the consumer really pushing back and demanding that from their service providers. So I look at that as a very positive sign. that they were, taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, and saying, hey, we're going to develop a framework that allows people to do this safely. Whether they take advantage of that or not in country X, that's a separate story. That's their issue. But we're going to allow it to be done safely if they and privately, if that's the way people want to write their apps, then that's great. I think, it's interesting to see that debate, though, especially in Europe, right? Because there's not really a lot of trust in the big providers either, right? Mm-hmm. So regardless of the details of the framework, there was kind of, hesitation, right? Pull back and looking at the, worried about, like, where's the shoe going to drop here? Where are they going to, kind of like breach my privacy as opposed to, protect it?
Well, a lot of it is the behavior of those companies or providers, but also when have they acquiesced to a government requirement and response? And frankly, it puts companies like yours in the position of, am I going to put a backdoor into our encryption to be able to sell into this particular country, this market, or do I hold my standards at a certain level and say we're just not going to sell there? And where do you fall on that curve? I mean, it's not always an easy choice, and kind of puts companies in that spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that all kind of plays into the overall trust in the company and the products mm-hmm. that they provide. And, I think, so you have consumers and business folks who are now forced to kind of look, well, who do I trust or distrust more, right? The government in my area or these Google. Large providers of these solutions, which sort am I choosing here, right? So sometimes it puts people in a difficult position. And I guess it also, opens the door for businesses like ours, right, to come into the void and say, hey, we're security first, privacy first product, right? And you have a choice. You can reach for something if that's important to you.
Well, I'm sure you've looked at this globally more than I have. Do you think are we still in the kind of beginning throes of figuring out what contact tracing is going to look like, and where does that occur, and what does that mean for privacy? Or has the stage been set already by some of these countries that have already jumped out and said, here's how you're going to do it? Matter of fact, you have to do it this way. And we're just sort of stuck with that already. Where are we in that journey?
Yeah, I think we're somewhat in the beginning. I think there are some countries, and I think the ones that we pointed out in our report, that really jumped for the centralized approach right away. Right. But I think there are also significant, COVID spike countries in our report. For instance, Italy. We saw a spike there, and that was really before what were we going to do about COVID tracing, right? That, like, their surge in COVID traces hit, at the early stages of talking about apps, right? So it was really just about fear. There wasn't Google and Apple weren't weighing in about the types of frameworks, and the Italian government wasn't necessarily talking about how centralized or decentralized it was going to be. I think there was just fear, right? So that played into it early on, and that's a significant driver, right? As we know. But I think other places that we mentioned, South Korea, Australia, right? Other places where it took a little bit of time for it to shape up. And kind of pan out which approach they were going to take, but I still think that we have a long way to go. I think if you look at Europe in general, I think we saw a difference between even, let's say, UK and France versus Germany. And there's a difference in our usage number spike, during this time of those two. And we looked at, well, what's the real difference between those two? And if you look, it's the difference between government talking a lot about a centralized approach to COVID tracing versus decentralized, kind of the Google and Apple framework version. So I think we are at the beginning of this. But, I think what's interesting is that overall, this is kind of just the next, or the current chapter in this kind of privacy versus security debate that we're having kind of at a global and cultural level. So COVID tracing is certainly the latest example of this, and we see it kind of panning out. We see governments acting. We see individual consumer fears, and of course, what we've been looking at mostly is the business fears. But it's not a new thing, right? This happened for years, right? Having to do with encryption backdoors and so on and so forth. So in that respect, I'd say that we're well on our way, but we're going to see, kind of how this pans out as COVID tracing, gets a little bit more, I guess, defined, right? It's still not quite there. Yeah, it's not quite mature. Being a U.S. citizen, I'm not seeing, a giant push for me as an individual to get onto a COVID tracing app, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, I still think, as the longer this goes, the more, the more politicians are going to, kind of mandate it, and maybe they're just slower to react in certain areas.
Well, I don't know that it's a single data point to use, but I always look back at the Patriot Act, and the greater the threat, that's a time for governments to step in and make those kind of changes. People are willing to give up their privacy, give up some of their rights in place of safety. If they feel, very threatened, they tend to give up more. Now, since then, I think society, this is just my commentary on it, with Facebook and others, we've also cultivated generations of people who are more comfortable giving up more of their privacy in lieu of services and other capabilities. And it's sort of a kind of leaking boat kind of thing. But it makes sense that governments would react quickly if they followed that philosophy of strike while the iron's hot. Well, the biggest fear, the biggest unknown, now it's the time to go after it. And you can say, well, the U.S. didn't do that yet. On the other hand, I don't remember the name of the act, but I think the Senate passed a bill that lets them or the FBI look at our web history. Oh, great. Just what we want without, having to get a court order or something. We'll see if that passes. But privacy is kind of under threat in multiple areas. What I'm really curious from your business, the kind of work that you do, collaboration, communication, what unique changes or besides just usage are you see coming your way have already happened because of COVID and change in work and concerns around privacy?
Well, I mean, COVID in particular, I think, we tried to explain some of the spikes, beyond just the overall rising tide of a lot more people working from home, right? That we expected. So I can't, as far as COVID in particular, I'm not sure, kind of the lasting impact that's going to have beyond just what the things you just mentioned, right? That businesses have to deal with regardless, even 2 months prior to COVID. Just the idea that security and privacy are in opposition of each other. And that is very much a cultural thing. I think people see that differently in different areas of the world. Mm-hmm. And are willing to trade more or less of it depending on, how they were raised, what they believe. Right.
And if they have a choice.
That's a big part of it. Yeah. If they have a choice, I think the debate, it's a valid debate. I think there are good people on both sides of that. And I think, overall, I think for the most part, governments in free countries anyway, are not necessarily they're not looking at it from a perspective of diminishing privacy rights of people. I think they're looking at it as, hey, we're trying to do our job, right? And in order to do our job, we need access to this data to do it the best we can, right? And it's not necessarily their job. I equate it to just personal history. I used to work in government, right? I used to work in law enforcement, cybercrime, forensics, right? There's the U.S. Constitution that is the barrier to, an investigator like myself just doing whatever I wanted to do in order to get data and investigate things. Mm-hmm. And when you're in that job, you're trying to do your job, that appears to be in the way, right? Mm-hmm. So I understand people on that side of the argument, but then I also believe very strongly that, we should not necessarily overreact to things like 9/11, like COVID, right? And use it as a, here's the tool and here's the reason why we need to throw all this stuff out. Because we'll look back and regret it.
Sorry, excuse me. It always hits on the argument of that may be a valid purpose, but what about everything else you could do with that information? And how do I know that's not going to, and those are tough things, how do you prove a negative? You're not going to do that.
Yeah. And it also has to do with we're not necessarily having the right debates, right? I think a lot of times technology providers like us are required in debates like that. We're not always in those debates, but we're required because it's not necessarily a silver bullet magic solution that we can say that, oh, we can provide some magical access to secure data, right, for government and just the right government people and only the government people with the purest intent, right? But not allow that same access to, government actors with not the purest intent, first of all, and bad guys and hackers and, foreign intelligence analysts and all these things. Like, it's very hard to have that both ways. And I think technology providers can explain that a little bit, right? That the technology doesn't work like that, right? It's hard to have something that provides the ultimate security, but also is wide open to certain other people, right? Like it doesn't work like that. And I think a lot of times we're not having that debate, or even just on a higher philosophical level, such as some of the things you mentioned with looking at browser activity, or prior to that, the Earn It Act, is something that is starting to get a little bit of play. But the idea is that we're not having this debate out in the open, right? We're not talking about it in terms of the privacy versus security. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we're not having that debate on a national level, right? Or do we want to sacrifice, do we want to have, government to have, GPS trackers on all citizens all the time, right? I mean, it would probably solve a lot of crimes.
You get the ambulance there quicker, but
yeah, right. It probably would if you look at it from that perspective, but it's just, what are you giving up to get there?
Right.
And is that the world that's worth living in? Right. I think we need to have that debate on a national level. And I think when I look at things like Earn It, and I look at how we're not quite having the debate, it's sort of hidden, we're afraid to have the debate, the people who are trying to pass the legislation, right? And we're kind of hiding. Earn It in particular kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way there, is that it's not really, doesn't come out and say, we're going to ban encryption or we're going to put in a backdoor. But it says that, well, an independent panel of 10 people will tell you what's the best to do later. Right. And that's not really having a debate.
And for those who may not be familiar with Earn It is eliminating abusive, rampant neglect of interactive technologies, a la, violations of law related to online checks, child pornography, sexual abuse, that kind of thing. Companies can earn through that Earn It. Well, we as you said, the debate's not happening enough in the open, and certainly that's true. And we don't have enough time to have all of it here either. But I think it's still been an interesting conversation. And yeah, thanks for sharing what you're seeing about the different nation states and what governments are doing, because nobody finds about that. I mean, the mainstream media generally is not reporting on that kind of thing. It's just not an everyday topic. And hopefully we can elevate the conversation through this and some other mechanisms. So thanks for coming on, Chris.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mitch.
Where can folks get the report?
They can check out wicker.com. And we have a blog there, and that'll be posted on the blog.
Excellent. Great. Fun talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So long.
Thanks very much, Mitch. Appreciate the efforts. And now, guys, it's that time of the day where we are going to go on Thursday for our channel roundup to the one and only Mike Vizard, who has Tim Henricks from Styra lined up. Over to you, Mike.
This is Digital Anarchist.
All right, thanks, guys. We're here with Tim Henricks, who is the CTO for Styra. We're going to be talking about the declarative authorization service for microservices that is based on the open policy agent that is widely used in the land of containers. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mike. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So walk us through what you guys are doing here. People have seen the declarative authorization service before, but now we're going to do this with a microservice. What does that mean?
Yeah, sure. So Styra's declarative authorization service is really a product geared toward providing organizations with a unified way of enforcing policy across all of their different cloud native software systems. So specifically, we focus on authorization, meaning which machines and people can perform which actions. So microservices is an especially interesting case for this, because what we're trying to do is help users be able to control which APIs each of those different microservices can execute on behalf of which people and machines. That's really what we're looking at, and especially as people move to the cloud native, this problem becomes all the more important.
What was the challenge in doing that, per se? We have seen people talk about attaching agents to containers, but containers are pretty small, so how do I get something that feels like an agent to attach to containers or a microservice, or what is the motion there?
For sure, yeah. So the Open Policy Agent was really designed to solve this kind of policy decoupling. Being able to run OPA next to a container as a sidecar is what OPA was designed to do architecturally. So it's a very small binary, roughly 20 meg without anything loaded. And so it fits fairly naturally in this cloud native paradigm of running sidecars next to containers. So that was sort of built in and solved when we designed the Open Policy Agent.
All right, so that sits next to the microservice now and attaches as a sidecar. And who installs this? Is it the developer or somebody else? And is this part of this whole conversation about shifting compliance to the left?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different choices that developers have. We know that every organization runs microservices and a little differently. So one choice is to attach OPA to a service mesh. So if the organization is using a service mesh, Istio Envoy, Linkerd, and the like, then you can connect OPA directly into that service mesh. And in that case, it's often the platform engineering team that can go ahead and deploy OPA along with the service mesh. And that's pretty simple. Other organizations have decided that they want their developers to be the ones that go ahead and deploy and release OPA as a sidecar, and they're free to do that as well. So it depends a bit on the organization who's actually responsible for deploying OPA.
Do you think developers are embracing that idea, or they look at that as just more work and somebody's trying to kick the can down the road to them, or what's going on?
I think that what a number of developers are doing right now is using OPA to to accelerate their time to market, to actually implement authorization within their application. So we're seeing a number of developers actually love the fact that OPA is sort of this pre-built building block that they can use to implement end-user authorization even for their application. And so those developers certainly love it.
So is the idea that instead of waiting for the compliance folks to bless my app, I can put OPA in there up front, and then I have compliance built in, and I'm basically, waving at the compliance people as I drive by? Is that what goes on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we see people doing is just from the get-go is that if you are using OPA and deploying it to do authorization for your application, it's just a time to market thing. It's just there's a sophisticated solution to authorization that developers can pick up and use. In terms of how security, compliance, and maybe even the platform team look at it, they do seem to like it and love it, right? Because now if the security team wants to do a review, they're not looking through reams of Java code or Ruby code. They've got a dedicated system responsible for authorization, so they can review just that. Compliance is very similar. So certainly this does help those security and compliance teams, and we see that those authorization policies are really embraced by both of those teams as well as the operations and developers as well.
How hard is this to set up? Does a developer need some help, or can they all do it themselves?
Certainly, we've seen people take OPA and use it all by itself. Obviously, Styra's declarative authorization system makes that quite a bit easier, so that you've got things like certainly deploying OPA is something that the teams have to do and have to make a choice about how they want to deploy OPA. But once it's deployed, then you've got all the issues that you need to address around how do you author policies, how do you collaboratively author policies, how do you distribute policy out to all the OPAs that are running. Remember, OPA is a sidecar after all. And then we do other things like help with impact analysis, is what we like to call it. So before you go ahead and update a policy that is already deployed, you might want to know what impact that policy change might have. And so what we do is we take a record of all the previous policy decisions that were made by those microservices and rerun them against your policy to tell you maybe there was a 10% or maybe it was a 90% change in the policy decisions. And so that kind of feedback is incredibly valuable in terms of rolling it out in an enterprise.
And does this become part of my CI/CD platform? Is it an extension, or how does it integrate inside of a DevOps workflow?
Yep. So Styra's declarative authorization service does go ahead and integrate directly with Git, and so it moves smoothly into standard developer workflows. You know, this OPA as well as Styra's DAS product embody policy as code, and so we want to make sure that all the usual developer workflows are that we work smoothly with them. So for sure.
What's your sense of going forward? Is everything going to be microservices based, or am I going to have a mix of microservices and monolithic apps? And if that's the case, do I need one instance of declarative authorization service or multiple instances, or how do I deal with this polyglot world we live in?
For sure. Another good question. Yeah. So I think that that this idea of microservices is really a journey, right? So everybody's going to start with some application in all likelihood. And what we've seen people do is start pulling out one piece after another and sort of moving toward more of a microservice-based architecture. But certainly having this sort of hybrid for a while. And then there are, of course, totally greenfield applications where we're seeing people just build microservice applications from the ground up. So that's typically the two things we see. In both cases, one of the nice things is that the Styra's declarative authorization system is really something that allows you to manage policy across whichever of those microservice-based applications you care to. So multiple applications you can use with a single DAS instance. And remember that the Styra's DAS also supports Kubernetes admission control and authorization for Kubernetes. So again, you get this one product that allows you to enforce unified authorization across both the cluster, the Kubernetes platform itself, and the applications running on it. And that's part of why we're so excited about this recent announcement, is that for the first time you actually get control over both the platform and the app that's running on that app.
What is different about Kubernetes from your perspective in terms of adding support for that, and what are the challenges from a compliance perspective?
Sure. So, one big difference that you'll see is just the sort of the nature of Kubernetes versus the nature of microservices. Like the actual sort of resources that you're making authorization decisions about are quite a bit different. For Kubernetes, you're getting 200 lines of description about what the configuration is for this application. And so as a Kubernetes administrator, you need to write policy that makes a decision. Is this configuration for this application safe to put on the cluster, or is it not? In the microservice world, what you see is that the sort of thing that you're making a policy decision about is pretty small, pretty simple. It's a user, it's a method, it's a path, maybe a couple of other things, a token. And so the kind of thing that you're actually writing policy about is quite a bit different. And so that's really the biggest difference that we see between those two use cases.
What is the difference between creating controls for one compliance specification versus another? It seems like every time I turn around, there's a brand new one that somebody wants me to support. And I often wonder, don't all these things have like a common set of controls that I can work for or write to, and then I can maybe extend them from there? Is there an intelligent way of going about this, or do I have to go after each one from the ground up each time?
Right. Yeah, that's great. So, yeah, I mean, I think that different compliance regulations, they're all focused on maybe have a different angle on putting some good controls in place. And so one of the things that we think about is that the nice thing with policy as code is that you can actually write down like machine processable, machine understandable controls. And then, what you can do is independently map those to different compliance regulations. So the same control, the same piece of policy that you would write in the open policy agent language could map to 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 different compliance regulations. And so that is one of the things that we started doing within Styra's declarative authorization service, is to do those mappings. We started with PCI. I think we chatted with you about that. We started with PCI, and we did exactly that. We wrote those OPA policies and then tied them, basically labeled them with some of the PCI regulations that they correspond to.
Cool. If that's the case, then as we go forward, how automated can I make the reporting process, right? Because there's all these auditors out there, and ultimately what I really want to do is just hand them a report that is almost self-generated or automatic, and I want them just to kind of wave at it and bless it, and so I can get back to work, right?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, I think one of the things that we're looking at is making it is taking sort of that idea of, we've got policy as code. We can label different rules with what compliance regulations they correspond to, and then print out a report, print out a PDF, hand it over to an auditor. It's a great idea.
Do you think that this whole shift left with compliance or compliance as code is really just the flip side of this whole security as code movement and infrastructure as code movement, and everything's becoming code?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the high level bit here is that we are embracing this cloud native, this DevOps world in which the more things that we can put into code, the more the machine understands about what is supposed to be happening. So whether that's motivated by security or compliance or operations or development, like in all of those cases, and we actually see all of those different teams loving this notion of policy as code. But the more that you can put into code, the more the machine simply understands and can automate. And that, at the end of the day, provides a bunch of safeguards and guardrails so that as developers move as quickly as they can and want, you've got the machine who knows what's supposed to be happening and can make sure that those developers don't make mistakes, that you mitigate risk, and that at the end of the day, you accelerate software development.
Hey, I'd love to get your take on this. The security guys are always screaming about how compliance does not equal security, and it gives you a baseline, but you shouldn't mistake it for security. What's your take on what is the relative security level you do get when you attain compliance?
I think that's a good question. I think it varies a bit. I think that what we see certainly is that security, compliance, operations, developer teams, they all love the idea that you can actually take these real world PDFs and wikis of the policies that are contained within them, codify them in software, and put them into a dedicated system that now all the teams that care about it can go ahead and analyze and understand and maybe even contribute to it if they're so willing and able.
Yeah. What's your best advice then to people as they approach this whole space? How do I get everybody on board in a way that may not be as contentious as it can be, and get everybody to kind of say, hey, let's do this in a way where the compliance guys trust the developers do the right thing, and the compliance guy can sleep at night because he can see what they're doing?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that I would advise. So first of all, I would advise that you don't try to boil the ocean. So pick one concrete problem that you want to start with. Let's say it's microservice authorization or it's Kubernetes admission control. Those are both great candidates. But find one particular place where policy as code using OPA and maybe the Styra Declarative Authorization Service is the right solution. Prove that it works. Actually prove that it works. Get it rolled out into production. Talk with those compliance and compliance security operations. Make sure that they all see what you're doing. And then once you have success there, go ahead and move on to other areas. So if you try the opposite, which is you try to convince everybody in the organization to go ahead and do this, it's going to be a long, hard battle. If instead you find one solution or one problem to solve and you solve it well, then you will continually make progress.
All right. So the irony here, though, is in some ways developers are going rogue in order to get around the compliance guys by executing compliance and therefore not being rogue.
Right. Yeah. And then I think the other thing that I'll say is that one of the things that you get with something like policy as code is really this ability to test. Right. So, what we've seen some people do is say developers are writing policy. That's fine. If security and compliance want to write tests over that policy to put guardrails on what those policies can and should be doing, let them do it. And then you get sort of the ability for all sides to be involved in this to make sure that the right policies are in place at the right time.
All right, last question. Should compliance people learn how to code?
I think some people will say everybody should learn how to code. I think it's a great skill. So I certainly enjoy it. I was actually trying to teach the kids some iOS programming over the weekend. So I'm all for everybody learning the code.
All right. Hey, Tim, thanks for being with us today.
All right. Thanks, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All righty. I think that's going to call a wrap on today's show for Thursday, May 21st. Reminder, tomorrow we're going to show a best of previous TechStrong TV show. No show on Monday. We'll be back Tuesday with some really great fresh content. But I'm going to tell you the same thing I've told our media ops staff. It's a long weekend. Enjoy the weekend. Get out. Get some sunshine if you can. Get some fresh air. And you can't work from home and burn both ends, right? You need some, some on-off time. And this is a great weekend for some on-off time. So enjoy your weekend. We'll see everyone back here on Tuesday. This is Alan Schimmel. Stay safe. Stay well. Stay strong. Tech strong.